Damn, bro, a giant monster, and all I've got is a sword. It'd be awesome if a metal bar suddenly turned into a badass weapon, and yeah, that's exactly what happened. This guy forged a crazy weapon that looked just like something straight out of Power Rangers. He took down the monster with a single shot, but it'd be pretty awesome to have a robot made too. Sure, why not? The knights thanked him and begged for more help, but he didn't want to help anyone. It was way too much trouble. He simply walked away while the knights were still terrified. They ran around screaming for help. Meanwhile, this guy casually forged a gigantic sword out of nowhere. Bro, that sword is twice his size. But wait, how did we even get here? I'm already lost. Basically, the world of a Ghost Labyrinth game merged with the real world. People awakened incredibly powerful abilities. Others tried using modern weapons to explore the dungeons, but this guy went completely against the norm and chose the worst class possible, craftsman. He had such an intimidating aura that he ignored everyone around him. He knew exactly what he wanted to do and didn't care what anyone else thought. Then he finished forging a sword and was all happy about it. At that moment, this bastard system suddenly alerted him. Someone, his sister, was asking for help. He sprinted there like a madman. When he arrived, there was a tiny blue Tinkerbell floating there. On the other side, the guards were startled by his scream. That little Tinkerbell was actually what his sister had turned into. That's why he screamed. Even she had no idea what had happened. When he used his system to analyze her, it gave some kind of error. But through the glitched display, he realized there was an item that might be able to turn her back. It was something similar to a Philosopher's Stone, an ultra-rare item. And even if you wanted to craft it, the materials were insanely expensive. We're talking about 100 million gold. But since he was a craftsman, if he could gather the materials, he could make it himself. And that's how he decided to save his sister, Sheikah, or rather, Tinkerbell. Inside the dungeon, he started preparing and immediately crafted a stick of TNT. This guy doesn't mess around. He's about to blow the monsters to pieces. At that moment, a mage named Ignis, let's just say he had a very punchable face, was laughing at our protagonist. The protagonist just wanted to ignore him, while his sister was getting angry. But Ignis pulled out a rod and tried to smack the little fairy on the butt. Her brother grabbed his arm like it was made of paper. He was furious that this guy dared to lay a hand on his sister. 1 second later, Ignis fired off a spell. He smugly assumed the protagonist had been vaporized, but the protagonist casually blocked the attack with nothing more than a stick of TNT and a bottle of water. This guy is seriously badass. He immediately started crafting another item. Meanwhile, Ignis was practically wetting his pants after seeing that the protagonist's level was 999. Ignis screams in disbelief, questioning if his level is really 999. He then insists it's impossible, since that's the game's max level and an artisan like him shouldn't exist. Suma explains that, just like potions, crafted items are also enhanced according to the player's level. Hearing this, the mage's companions mutter among themselves, wondering if he'll really lose to an artisan. Ignis then wonders aloud if he's really about to lose the fight. Then he refuses to accept this possibility and conjures a huge magic circle. With all his might, the mage shouts the name of the spell, Earthbreak, to annihilate his opponent. The cave floor shatters in an explosion of energy, sending rocks flying everywhere. Even amidst the chaos, Suma swiftly dodges all the debris flying his way. After the attack ceases, he stands in the center of the crater without a single scratch. Ignis laughs and calls him pathetic, revealing he has already mastered the advanced magic of the 4 elements. Next, he orders the artisan to beg for mercy in exchange for a possible pardon. A giant creature emerges from the shadows, rising up over the mage. Sheikah watches the scene, completely paralyzed by the creature's size. Then, Ignis himself is startled when he realizes what he has just summoned. Suma then realizes the mage's attack tore a huge hole down to the dungeon's lower floors. With that, he laments that a ridiculously strong monster has appeared because of the commotion. Immediately after, the dragon prepares a fireball to attack. The creature then unleashes a blast of fire at Ignis's group. Ignis screams in desperation as the flames advance toward him. One of his companions screams as he falls into the hole created by the spell. Suddenly, a pillar of water intercepts the dragon's fire attack. While Sheikah panics about what to do, Suma laments that this is a horrible way to start. He then asks if Sheikah can use her scout ability, but she insists that fairies are too weak to fight. Next, he asks her to just provide support and find the creature's weak spot, and Sheikah readily agrees to the mission. With that, she flies toward the dragon while dodging the fire attack. Then, she activates her ability to find the monster's weak spot. The narration explains that giant monsters always have a weak spot on their bodies, and finding it is a scout's job. As soon as the analysis is complete, she shouts that the weak spot is at the base of the dragon's tail. Arriving at the location, Suma confirms he understood and prepares his attack. With that, he throws the bomb, which explodes right on the dragon's weak spot. Even with the attack, onlookers comment that it's not working and that the monster is just too monstrous. Suma then states that it's enough, as his goal is the rare item obtained by landing a critical hit on the weak spot. Next, he announces he will create a vibrating spear and combine his mini mining bombs into one large bomb. Then, he reveals he will fuse it all with a dragon scale to perform a triple creation. An intense light envelops the area as the new weapon is forged. As the light dissipates, Suma emerges holding the draconic pile bunker. The dragon charges furiously at him, ready for the final attack. Without backing down, he readies the weapon to intercept the creature's charge. He then apologizes to the monster, but states that this is the end. An ammo casing falls to the ground, indicating the weapon has been fired. The projectile pierces the dragon's body, dealing massive damage. Suma is surprised to see his weapon did enormous damage. Ignis's group watches the scene in complete shock, and the other adventurers are also terrified by what just happened. Shika cheers excitedly, shouting that he did it, and that's the Suma she knows. Then, he looks into the hole and hears a voice calling from down below. Ignis begs for help, and Suma asks why he didn't escape using his magic. The mage explains he used all his mana on the last attack, and Suma concludes that he's an idiot. Suma says he can save him, but it won't be for free, demanding a sincere apology to Shika first. Desperate, Ignis apologizes profusely for his behavior, repentant for his rudeness and poor judgment. Next, he says he wants one more thing, explaining that if he leaves him there, he won't earn a single gold coin. With that, he demands the mage hand over all the money he has. Once the deal is struck, Suma thanks him for the business, but warns there won't be a next time. Then he approaches a portal with his weapon at his side. Suddenly, he collapses against the wall in exhaustion, and Shika shouts his name. He then admits he's exhausted and has reached his limit, but is interrupted by an approaching group. One of the adventurers explains they were watching and were impressed, and Suma asks what they want. With that, the man asks if he would be willing to sell the weapon he just used. The adventurer offers 300,000 gold for the weapon, and an excited Shika yells that they should sell it immediately. Suma wonders if the weapon is really worth that much, thinking an item like that could be obtained just by gathering resources. The man denies it, explaining it's impossible to get an item with stats as insane as that plus 99 draconic pile bunker. He then emphasizes that, unlike in games, in real dungeons you have to risk your life at every moment. Suma then realizes that no one in their right mind would spend their days taking risks, as normal people would always choose safety. With that, a new idea forms in his mind. Then, he accepts the deal and tells them to use the weapon if it's enough for what they need. The reward for rescuing the hostile player appears on the screen, totaling 170,000 gold. Next, the sale of the draconic pile bunker is confirmed for the price of 300,000 gold. With that, the screen shows there are still 99,530,000 gold needed to reach the final goal. Back in the city, life goes on as usual. As they walk, Shika celebrates that they hit the jackpot twice in a row. Shika then asks what he was thinking about, and Suma reveals he had a good idea. He then suggests they should stop trying to make an honest living by exploring dungeons, which shocks her. Shika despairs, recalling they won't make it through the lower floors, as they barely survived a single dragon. He then points a weapon at her and says that, however, there is another way. With that, Suma raises a sword and declares that they still have crafting as their trump card. Then, Shika understands the plan and reacts with a smile of approval. She then explains that, unlike in the game, crafted items have real demand, and the plan is to get people to buy their creations. Their goal is to find items with easy-to-get materials that can be sold for huge profits. While Shika questions if they'll find something so convenient, Suma assures her they will, without a doubt. Standing before a large building, he states that this is the perfect place for their plan. He then approaches and pushes open the location's enormous golden doors. Opening them, Suma announces that this is the place in the Dream Labyrinth where the most gold changes hands. An intense light shines from within the hall, blinding the entrance. The place is revealed to be a grand, legendary auction for rare items. Inside the hall, bids for rare items climb quickly, reaching tens of thousands of gold. While Shika is impressed by the prices, Suma notes that this is, after all, the biggest auction in the Dream Labyrinth. Soon, the auctioneer announces that the sun and moon earrings have been sold for 90,000 gold. With a smile, he claims the real show will begin shortly. Next, the auctioneer presents the Black Shield Shadow Aegis with an opening bid of 100,000 gold. As soon as the item is announced, the bids skyrocket. quickly surpassing 400,000. One of the participants raises paddle number 49 to place a bid. Soon, a woman in the audience makes a final bid of 550,000. With that, the auctioneer confirms the amount and declares the item sold to the woman. Suma then decides their next crafting goal will be that shield, leaving Shika confused. He explains that the intense bidding war means many people are willing to spend huge amounts for the item. So, the plan is to mass produce the shield and sell it to everyone who lost the auction. He then says he's already excited just imagining the money they're going to make. To create the Shadow Aegis, 2 materials are needed: Shadow Adventite and Fire Dragon Blood. The narration explains that Fire Dragon Blood is a low-level item, and they already got it in the previous fight. To get the Shadow Adventite, they decided to go to the second floor of the labyrinth. Soon, he spots an adventurer with low mana and approaches him with an offer. Next, Suma offers one of the mana potions he crafted himself. He then asks for 1,000 gold for the potion, but the adventurer complains he's being completely ripped off. With that, he thought that since he had the chance, he might as well make some extra cash off other adventurers. Since the strategy worked surprisingly well, he might have gotten a little carried away with the sales. Even with the buyer complaining about the price, Suma insists that it's a fair value. He then explains that using that item lets you easily get past annoying traps. As the bids rise and fall, Shika comments that things are really heating up. Suddenly, she notices a strange movement approaching from behind them. At that, Shika screams Suma's name to warn him of the imminent danger. A pack of fierce monsters comes running down the hallway toward them. Then, the 2 adventurers scream in terror as they face the threat. Suma then regrets getting too distracted by haggling over prices, and now he has to run. With no time to think, one of the monsters leaps toward them to attack. As he flees, he realizes the monsters are still chasing them relentlessly. Shika suggests it would be faster to defeat them, but Suma says there are too many, and it's dangerous for her in the crossfire. As they continue to flee, he despairs upon realizing they've reached a dead end. With a smirk, he reveals that's what the monsters were supposed to think, preparing his creation cube. Soon, he summons a gigantic weapon called the Explosive Hammer to face the pack. Next, he yells that in a narrow space like this, he can finish them all at once. With that, he strikes the pack with a powerful blow that unleashes a wave of energy. The energy surges down the hallway, annihilating all the monsters in its path in one go. After the battle, he asks if Shika is okay, and she replies that it was good they found the perfect spot for the attack. As he laments the wasted time and gets ready to move on, the floor begins to give way beneath his feet. Suddenly, the floor shatters completely, and he starts falling into the hole. Unable to get a grip, he screams as he plummets through the newly opened hole. After the fall, he lands on a lower floor, groaning in pain from the impact. Lying on the ground, he regrets messing everything up and admits he'd be dead if he were outside the labyrinth. Then he realizes he pulled the same stupid move as Ignis by breaking the floor with his own attack. Shika yells his name as she falls into the darkness to reach him. As soon as she reaches him, she asks if he's okay, and Suma replies that he barely survived thanks to the hit point system. In the darkness, Shika asks where they are, and he says they need light first. With that, he uses his creation cube to forge a lantern. Then, he holds up the lantern and says it's time to see if they'll find demons or snakes. The light reveals a large, mysterious room with big capsules lined up on the walls. Not understanding what happened there, Suma guesses that given the game's setting, it must be the ruins of an ancient civilization. Suddenly, a metallic sound from a nearby passage catches their attention. At that, Shika screams and points at something she just saw in the darkness. He turns in the direction she's pointing and identifies the creature there. He then reveals it's one of FO's classic event bosses from the Grand Guignol series. Shika wonders if monsters like that exist here too, and Suma concludes the labyrinth is completely insane. From its design, he deduces that it's Grand Guignol Eve, an especially dangerous monster from its series. Shika then asks what they should do, and Suma begins to analyze the situation. He then asks her to wait a second and says he's going to investigate the creature up close. With a smile, Suma explains that Grand Guignols are famous for dropping valuable materials, and they can make a fortune here. Even with Shika warning him about the danger, he approaches the golem and tells her to relax. Just as he reaches it, he confirms the creature is completely shut down, and then something happens. Suddenly, one of the golem's eyes lights up with an intense glow. The golem abruptly activates, catching Suma completely by surprise. As the creature prepares to attack, he yells for Shika to fall back immediately. Then, the golem's compartment opens, releasing a large amount of steam. Hidden, they watch intently to see what's coming out from inside the golem. Amid the steam, he wonders what that silhouette he just saw was. The figure of an android girl emerges from inside the creature, connected to several cables. Back in the present, a new routine is settling in at Suma's workshop. As she sweeps, Eve complains that even this room is filthy. She then asks if the place isn't cleaned regularly. The android sighs at the mess she found throughout the house. With that, she states that, honestly, her master is a lot of work. Eve then adds that this only makes serving him even more rewarding. Completely confused, Suma wonders how things ended up this way. The scene flashes back to when the android was connected inside the golem. Right after the battle, he found her lying on the floor, completely deactivated. The narration explains that the Grand Guignol series is a raid boss made of a robotic shell with a mechanical doll as its core. In other words, it was a much tougher enemy than the dragon they faced before. The game's interface shows Suma's information, a level 999 craftsman. Suddenly, the doll identifies the player's name as Soma. With that, the android registers him as her new master, much to his surprise. The narration reveals that, to his shock, she lost all memory of being a boss and began insisting he was her master. He then explains that even though he told her not to follow him, he eventually gave in and brought her to the surface. While tidying the table, Eve comments that the room is a mess. Sheikah agrees that he never organizes anything, and Suma yells at them to stop ganging up on him. Then, he says he'll keep an eye on her, but Eve insists that her master call her by her name. Suma then announces they're returning to the labyrinth to find materials and orders her to stay and look after the house. The two stare at each other in silence for a brief moment. With a bow, Eve wishes her master a safe return. As they descend, he wonders why, of all things, she decided to act like a maid. He then assumes her backstory is showing through, leaving Sheikah confused by the term. Suma explains that according to the game's lore, Eve was a princess of an ancient civilization and reverted to that personality. With that, he concludes it makes sense she'd want to serve, but for now, they'll set that matter aside. He then turns, ready to focus on gathering materials for the Shadow Aegis, but he notices something. In the hallway, a group of experienced adventurers approaches them. He soon recognizes the group's leader as the paladin, Oliver. Upon seeing him, Oliver comments that it's rare to find him in the labyrinth and greets him. One of the adventurers asks if Oliver knows him, and he confirms they've known each other since before the labyrinth and calls him a weirdo. Suma retorts that the comment was rude, but one of the group members concludes that he's admitting he's a weirdo. At that, Oliver warns his party not to underestimate him or start a needless fight. He then explains that his base stats alone would be enough to defeat them, and the party agrees not to cause trouble. Then, the party's mage excitedly asks if the two are friends. Suma denies it and says they're just acquaintances, while Oliver claims they barely know each other. More importantly, Oliver asks him about his sister, mentioning they always explore the labyrinth together. With a serious look, he braces himself and says he'll explain what happened. After hearing the story, one of the adventurers says it's more realistic to believe she turned into a monster. He then adds it would be more believable than thinking Suma went crazy and got a pet monster modeled after his sister. Oliver states he doesn't have time to help, as he's heading to the lower floors to train his party. Even so, he reflects on the difficulty of earning 100 million gold just to save her. He then remembers Suma had said they aren't blood-related, but that he's very devoted to her nonetheless. With a smile, Suma confirms that of course he's devoted to her. Right after, he declares with conviction that she is his precious little sister. He then recalls that his parents died in an accident when he was just a child. With no relatives he could trust, he ended up all alone in the world. Then he reveals that she is his precious little sister, and at the same time the daughter of the people who saved him. The two grew up together, forming an inseparable bond over the years. With that, he reaffirms his determination, declaring he'll do whatever it takes to save her. Sheikah flies excitedly through the cave, scouting the path ahead. Suddenly, she yells that she's found the black diamond and celebrates the size of the piece. Seeing the crystal, he praises the scout, saying that, as expected, she did a great job. With the material in hand, he promises himself that no matter what, he will bring her back to normal. The narration explains that the poison dragon isn't a top-tier dragon-type monster, and that it would be easy to defeat one or two of them. However, the species variants possess a completely different level of strength, making a solo hunt nearly impossible. Sheikah then asks if they're really that strong, and Suma confirms that part of it is due to their raw stats. He then reveals that standard antidotes and magic don't work against a variant's lethal poison. Sheikah despairs, but he explains that without the right materials, creating a serum is impossible, and a recovery potion would only provide temporary relief. With that, he laments that at this rate, they won't be able to ask the adventurer what happened. With no other option, Suma decides they'll have to go down to the next floor as well. He then notes that since there's only one path, they'll naturally end up following in Oliver's footsteps. Soon after, Shika offers to scout the path ahead, and Suma warns her not to overdo it. As she descends, she thinks that scouting is her specialty and that she needs to prove herself useful. Suddenly, she stops when she comes across something unexpected on the floor below. Amidst a poisonous miasma, she realizes she needs to warn Suma immediately about what she found. Back at the top, Suma asks if she found any sign of Oliver's group. Shika reports that she could sense someone fighting, but Suma assumes he's fine, since his paladin skills can neutralize the miasma. With that, he decides they need to focus on their own situation, as facing a variant head-on would be suicide. Shika asks if they can't mine the Shadow Adventite somewhere else, but Suma insists on sticking to the plan. He then explains that the exploration difficulty of the other gathering areas is too high. With that, he concludes it's safer to gather there, avoiding the dragon, than to risk going elsewhere. Even with Shika worrying about the miasma, he reassures her, saying he already has a plan. Next, Suma says he'll take a bit of an item and quickly takes something from her, leaving her surprised. As she asks what he took, he reveals it's fairy dust, the gold standard for disease countermeasures. He then says he'll craft the powder with some decent materials, while Shika despairs at seeing him use her dust. Soon, he proudly displays the newly created item, a piece of equipment called a protection scarf. Suma then explains that, although it won't cure the variant's poison, the item should be enough to contain the miasma. Upon entering the area, he comments that the intensity of the miasma is impressive. With that, Suma asks Shika to handle navigation, and she readily accepts the task. Suddenly, an adventurer is thrown forcefully in front of them. Next, a shield flies at high speed toward them, surprising one of the adventurers. A monstrous creature appears and prepares to attack the paladin on the ground. The adventurer then uses his shield to try and block the creature's attack. Recognizing him, Oliver shouts Suma's name and laments that he saw him at his worst. Even so, he swallows his pride and begs the craftsman to give him a hand. Next, the paladin explains they can create a serum using the creature's own poison glands. Suma replies they're too busy to play the Good Samaritan and asks why the group's mage isn't preparing the serum. With that, Oliver reveals that his team is incapacitated and he can't save them alone. Desperate, he offers to pay whatever Suma wants, insisting he can't let them die. He then resigns himself to the situation and just sighs at the request for help. With a smile, Suma states that if there's a reward, it's a different story, and decides to help Oliver. Hearing the response, the paladin shouts a thank you for his acceptance. Soon after, Oliver uses a skill that creates a light barrier to defend himself. The monster recoils for a moment from the impact of the light barrier. The creature then watches the group, preparing for a new attack. Next, the monster fires a blast of poison at the paladin. Suddenly, an adventurer invokes the skill Giant Shield to protect everyone. The energy shield completely blocks the creature's poison attack. An adventurer appears and charges forward to attack the monster with his sword. He then lands a direct blow against the creature's face. At the same time, Oliver throws an item towards the battle. Suma reveals the item is a flashbang and tells the creature not to be shy and to take the full impact. The light from the explosion completely blinds the monster. With that, Oliver shouts as the light hits him head on. Next, he attacks and breaks the monster's horn with his sword. Oliver then shouts that he's counting on Suma to make the serum, and Suma replies that he can leave it to him. As Oliver watches, the creature attacks him with its tail, and he laments the situation. With the blow, the paladin is thrown forcefully against the ground. Shika warns that the dragon is coming, and Suma confirms that he already knows. He then realizes he's drawn all the creature's attention with the flashbang and prepares a containment creation. The monster then fires a blast of liquid poison in his direction, and the monster intercepts his creation. Shika desperately screams his name upon seeing him get hit by the creature's attack. He then laments that his creation was interrupted, realizing that at this rate all would be lost. Suddenly, an intense light appears and the two turn, surprised by the flash. With that, a weapon of light descends from the heavens and pierces the monster's body with a direct hit. Suma and Shika watch the scene, completely unable to understand what just happened. A mysterious silhouette appears amidst the light, drawing everyone's attention. Soon, the figure is revealed to be Eve, the android who was inside the golem. Back in the cave, Eve appears before the defeated monster, leaving Suma confused. He then wonders why she's there and if her boss memories have returned. He quickly concludes this is bad, as they have no way to fight a raid boss in their current state. Even without her giant robot, the android prepares to attack with a blade. Suddenly, Suma feels cornered by her intimidating presence. Then, she holds out her hand and gives him an item, surprising him. Confused, he asks if the red scarf she handed him is his. Eve then explains she only came to return the item he had forgotten. Completely bewildered, Suma thanks her, but she says there's no need as this is also a maid's duty. Shika sighs in relief at the unexpected turn of events. While Shika laughs, Suma thanks her for coming all this way just to deliver the item. Eve then explains that the item had torn without him noticing, so she took it to mend. She then asks her master and his sister to continue relying on her, and Suma agrees. Suddenly, the creature gets up, ready to attack again with full force. With the monster before them, Suma hands Eve an item and tells her to handle the rest. Eve then declares that forcefully eliminating insolent fools who bare their fangs at her master is also one of a maid's duties. With that, the creature charges forward to attack with all its might. She then intercepts the creature's attack with just one hand, creating a shockwave. The monster staggers back from the impact as poison drips from its body. Next, the monster stomps hard on the ground, releasing a pool of poison. As Shika shouts about the poison, Suma reassures her, telling her not to worry. Suma explains that dragon poison has no effect on automatons, which is why Eve can hold the monster off. With a determined look, she prepares to counterattack. Then she fires a sphere of energy from her bare hands at the creature. Eve dodges to the side, nimbly evading the monster's attack. She then strikes the monster's face with a series of energy blows. Though stunned, the monster lunges again to try and grab her. The creature reaches out to grab her at the last second. Suddenly, Oliver yells that he won't let the creature get her. With that, he strikes the monster with a blow of light to protect the android. Shika activates her weak spot detection skill to analyze the creature. She then shouts that the monster's weak spot is the nape of its neck and tells them to aim there. Even with this information, Suma concludes their damage is nowhere near enough. The narration explains that the paladin is defense-focused, and Eve lacks enough firepower in close combat. He then considers creating a serum to heal Oliver's allies, but realizes 2 more people would hardly make a difference. With that, he states there's only one option left, and calls out to Oliver to start his plan. Next, he yells for Oliver and his party to hand over all the items they have. As Oliver throws the items, Suma promises to create a weapon capable of defeating the creature. Even with Oliver doubting they can win, Suma assures him they can, because they have a very reliable maid on their side. The creation cube glows brightly as he begins the process. Then, he throws the newly created item and yells for Eve to catch it. Eve moves forward and catches the object mid-air, ready to use it. The item transforms into an energy gauntlet on her hand. Next, she flies towards the weak spot and strikes the monster's nape. The creature roars in pain as it's hit squarely by the devastating blow. With that, Eve activates her equipment, the lightning-heavy greave, for the final attack. She then concentrates a large amount of energy in her hand for the strike. Next, a beam of light hits the monster head-on, creating an opening. Then, she rushes in to kick the weak spot on the creature's nape. The blow unleashes a blast of energy that pierces through the monster's body. The light weapon shatters after completely piercing the creature. From the impact, she lands in the middle of a newly formed crater. With an orb in her hands, Eve declares the mission is complete. The game interface then displays the item obtained, the Venom Dragon's Jewel. In disbelief, Oliver comments that they actually managed to defeat the creature. While Eve heals his companions, Oliver thanks Suma for his help. Then Suma hands over the 3rd serum and asks them to take it to the thief waiting upstairs. After saying their goodbyes, Oliver's party leaves the cave, leaving them behind. With the mission accomplished, Eve turns to her master and calls out to him. Next, she thanks him for entrusting her with such an important role in the battle. Suma explains it was no big deal, and that he just chose the method that would cause the most damage. Shika teases him for being so bad at being honest with his feelings, and he just tells her to shut up. He then declares that if Eve is going to be his maid, she'll have to do her part as a combat force so the 3 of them can earn 100 million. He then says that if she doesn't like the idea, she can just find a new master to serve. With a smile, Eve accepts the condition and tells him to leave everything to her. The screen displays total sales of 45,000 gold and the 300,000 gold reward for rescuing Oliver's party. The interface then shows that 190,000 gold is still needed and displays the rare materials obtained on the journey. A special note then informs that the automaton maid, Grand Guignol Eve, has officially joined the party. Elsewhere, a luxurious mansion stands out in the urban landscape. A man reports to his lady that the artisan has gathered the materials for the Shadow Aegis and that it's only a matter of time until mass production. The woman then comments that she thought he was nothing more than a mere artisan, but that he's not so bad after all. With a smile, she decides that, in that case, she'll have to teach him his place. A few days after the battle, a buyer shouts that the item is splendid. The adventurers admire the Shadow Aegis Plus 99, amazed by an enhancement rank they've never seen before. With that, the buyer hands over a bag with 400,000 gold as payment. Suma thanks Rudd, but he insists on knowing how the craftsman got the item. He replies that it's a trade secret and offers to track down any other gear they want. The narration explains they mined a ton of black diamond, enough to create 5 Shadow Aegis shields. So they chose to sell the shields to the mid-level explorers, who lost the bidding war at the auction. The plan allowed them to avoid auction fees and also make new business contacts. Next, Suma reveals he found a rare weapon along with the Shadow Aegis materials. He then presents the Cursed Poison Longbow, a special model crafted with the mutant dragon's jewel. Even though the buyer laments he can't afford it, Suma offers to introduce him to people who might be interested. The man reveals there will be a gathering of hunter explorers who would kill for a bow like that. In exchange for the information, he asks for priority in buying the next rare weapons, and Suma accepts the deal. Outside, a voice excitedly calls for her older brother, Suma. Shika asks how the sales went, and Suma replies that they were obviously great. He then reveals he sold 2 of the 5 Aegis for 750,000 gold, and that at this rate, they'll reach 1.5 million soon. Suddenly, Eve approaches, carrying a heavy backpack. Eve greets him back and comments that his business seems to be going very well. Shika celebrates that the sales are amazing, and that they'll soon hit 3 million. With a serious look, Eve reminds him that 3 million is only 3% of their final goal of 100 million. Suma agrees that at the current pace it will take time, but reveals he already has the next step in mind. He then decides to save the plan for later, and asks them to focus on selling what they have on hand. Next, Suma shows off the bow and says he already has a buyer in mind to fund the next step. The hunters' gathering takes place in a village built atop a giant tree. At the event, a full line of essential items for hunters is on display. With that, Suma invites everyone to come closer and take a look at his products. He then announces that the main attraction of the day is about to be revealed. Soon, he presents the Cursed Poison Longbow, sending the crowd into a frenzy. With a smile, he approaches one of the hunters and suggests that, at his level, the weapon would be a perfect fit. The hunter awkwardly backs away, stammering that he doesn't need the weapon right now. Suma realizes something is wrong when even the simplest hunting bows aren't selling. Other vendors comment that they can't sell even a basic bow. Soon, he realizes the buyers aren't uninterested or hesitant. The narration explains it's as if they're afraid of what would happen if they bought something from him. Suddenly, a man in the crowd shouts and calls him a pipsqueak, pushing his way through the others. The hunter, a predator named Hayato, questions who gave him permission to set up a shop there. Suma remains silent, just observing the newcomer's provocation. Hayato then asks who he thinks he is, stating he doesn't recognize his face. With a serious look, he introduces himself as Suma, a craftsman, and asks if he needs anything else. Hayato laughs and says the craftsman class is just a fancy way of saying jack of all trades. Even facing the insult, Suma just comments that it's been a while since he's heard that reaction. Next, Hayato convinces the others to buy weapons made by him instead of the trash from a useless class. With that, Suma understands he's the reason nothing is selling, as he's intimidating others and monopolizing the profits. The narration explains that other classes can also craft items, as long as they are within their specialty, and that Hayato was selling his own creations. Suma reacts with surprise to Hayato's provocation, not understanding the hostility. Eve asks what items he's referring to, and Suma replies that he sees nothing but store-bought junk. At this, Hayato becomes enraged and questions him about what he just said. He then threatens him, saying he'll crush him, but Suma accepts the challenge and calls him out for a duel. Hayato proposes that if he wins, Suma will be banned from the area, but Suma refuses the bet. With a smile, he calls him a coward for only fighting when the terms are in his favor. He then demands that Hayato also be permanently banned if he loses the duel. Hayato shoots an arrow into the ground, creating a dividing line. He accepts the terms, but adds that if Suma loses, he'll be left half dead and crippled. With that, he proposes they each craft a bow and arrow, and the first to land a hit wins. Hayato then declares he'll show him the difference between their classes, preparing to shoot. At the last second, an arrow hits his hand, and he turns around, not understanding what happened. With the bow in his hands, Suma apologizes and says it was an accident. Next, he reveals that his bow has auto-aim and can't miss. Then, Suma complains about wasting rare materials on this nonsense, explaining they were for a client, and now he'll have to buy them again. Meanwhile, Hayato runs exhausted through the forest to escape his humiliation. Upon reaching the village, he swears he won't forgive him for making a fool of him in front of everyone. With that, Hayato yells that Suma will regret this and activates one of his skills. He then uses the skill Call of the Beast to summon a creature. As a group of explorers panics, screaming to run from the monsters, another adventurer insists they need to fight. Then, the android Eve moves forward and neutralizes one of the creatures with a single strike of her blade. Eve turns to Suma and asks what's going on, and he replies that the attacks seem too coordinated to be natural. From a distance, Hayato deduces with a smile that this is the work of the predator he met earlier. At this, Shika asks if the enemy intends to get banned, but Suma clarifies it's likely just a distraction. The boy in the red scarf then concludes that the real target is somewhere else, and if he were in the hunter's shoes, he would be the main objective. In that instant, Suma senses imminent danger approaching. He confirms his suspicions by defending against an arrow and declaring that he was the target all along. Faced with the situation, Suma decides he has no choice but to attack the predator directly, while Shika warns him about the shooter's long distance. Even so, he creates a bow and fires multiple arrows, wondering if they'll even reach the enemy. The projectile's energy trail speeds towards the target. Suddenly, Hayato senses the approaching counterattack. He then watches the energy arrows rise into the sky, heading his way. Calmly, the hunter in the green bandana watches the projectiles lose power and fall around him, causing no damage. Hayato then scoffs at the useless attempt, asking if his opponent doesn't even know about the distance damage penalty. With a smile, Hayato states that ranged attacks are useless, as he has a special skill that nullifies damage fall-off. He then fires an arrow, declaring that his fighting style is to finish off opponents while they're surrounded and unable to move. The hunter in the green bandana then launches an arrow with an explosive attached towards his target. Suddenly, Hayato's eye reflects an unexpected glint approaching fast. The next instant, one of the energy arrows he had ignored explodes right in front of him. As he falls, Hayato realizes it was a bomb created by his opponent, but he believes he can withstand the damage. Right after, he notices several other explosive arrows are about to hit him in mid-air. With that, a series of explosions echoes through the forest. From a distance, Suma watches the smoke rising from the site of the attack. With a confident smile, he wonders if his opponent really thought he'd fight using conventional tactics. Soon after, the other adventurers thank Suma profusely, explaining they'd been tormented by the predator, Hayato, for a long time. Suma then brushes off their thanks, stating that buying a mountain of his products is more than enough for him. Later, he comments that the permanent ban was just a verbal promise and wonders if Hayato won't just come back, feigning ignorance. The adventurer who gave him the gift replies that, with that exact thought in mind, they'd like to make a special request of Suma. The adventurer explains that the meeting hall isn't an original labyrinth facility, but a base built by the explorers themselves. He continues, explaining it all started with 10 volunteers from the advanced hunter classes. Together, they joined forces to create the base, which was managed fairly by all 10 of them. However, the man reveals that one by one they disappeared during explorations, until Hayato, the last one remaining, used his privileges to monopolize the item supply. At this, Suma understands that Hayato acted so arrogantly because he was the sole administrator, since the privileges of a self-built base were very powerful. The adventurer then adds in a whisper that there's a rumor the other administrators were actually murdered by Hayato. Suma then asks what the request is, and the man apologizes for the delay and points to a nearby spot. Suma and Shika look in the indicated direction. The man introduces the place as the Divine Tree, and Suma immediately notices its imposing presence, starting to suspect what the real request is. The request is then revealed, to create a new base using the Divine Tree itself as the material. He explains that if the base is replaced, the predator will no longer be able to act freely, and they might even be able to banish him for good. While Shika asks if he can do something so grand on his own, Suma confirms that it's possible. With a smile, Suma warns that for a job of this scale, the reward will have to match, and the adventurer immediately agrees. As proof, the man announces they've gathered 5 million gold from everyone's contributions and will give it all to Suma. Then, Suma's creation cube materializes, ready to begin the work. Suma announces the deal is a success and suggests finishing everything by the end of the day, leaving the others shocked. The adventurer replies that's impossible, recalling that the current base took 10 people a month to build. Suma then explains that since creating a base is just joining several parts, he just needs to speed up the process by doing everything simultaneously. The adventurer is impressed by the idea of him using an advanced technique to create 2 parts at once. Then, the man realizes it's not just two, but several creation cubes being activated at the same time. With dozens of cubes floating around him, Suma prepares to begin the massive construction. With a gesture, he commands the cubes, which begin to shape the divine tree with beams of energy. And so, the boy in the red scarf activates his large-scale creation skill. A wave of energy expands through the forest as the new base quickly takes shape. In a few seconds, a wooden platform appears directly on the tree's trunk. Right after, an access bridge materializes, connecting the structure. Finally, a complete structure with an elevator appears, integrated into the tree. Before everyone's shocked eyes, Suma announces that the construction is complete. Elsewhere, Hayato falls to the ground, unable to believe what just happened to him. Suddenly, a mysterious figure approaches and reveals they've been watching Hayato the whole time. The mysterious figure laments that Hayato was defeated so easily, calling the effort of killing the other administrators for him a waste. Even as Hayato tries to beg for his life, an energy spike rushes towards him. The weapon then strikes him dead on, making him scream that this has to be some kind of mistake. As the hunter in the green bandana agonizes on the ground, the figure on the tree branch declares they will make good use of his life, and ironically says, "No thanks are necessary." First, the system details the sale value of items like the Shadow Aegis and the Divine Bow Brahmastra. Next, it displays the total sales made to explorers of the Hunter class. Then, the screen summarizes material costs, the reward for the new base, and a total net profit of over 6 million. With that, Suma reveals with a smile that his current savings are around 7 million. He then tells Eve that, besides the 5 million from creating the base, he was glad the Divine Bow sold for more than expected in a mini-auction. Eve then analyzes that the raw material cost was about 40% of the revenue, when ideally it should be kept at 30% at most. Suma justifies that the percentage is decent since they stocked up on rare materials, agreeing it would be impossible to gather everything himself to cut costs. Suddenly, Shika notices a message notification and wonders who it could be from. In a panic, the little fairy reveals the message is from the Self-Management Committee and that they're summoning him. Confused, the android repeats the name of the Self-Management Committee. A narration explains that one of the biggest differences between the Phantom Labyrinth and its game prototype is the non-existence of game masters. These masters acted as customer support, responsible for settling disputes and punishing rule breakers. Since this function doesn't exist in the labyrinth, a voluntary organization was created by the explorers themselves to maintain public order. This organization is the Phantom Labyrinth's Self-Management Committee, which Suma begins to comment on. He then points out that the predator from the other day acted without any restraint, leading Eve to question if the committee really works as it should. Suma comments that the labyrinth scale is too massive, and Eve adds that, at best, the committee can only maintain order in the surface areas. At that moment, someone opens the door and enters the room. A man with light blue hair thanks the artisan Suma for his presence, who in turn replies that he was surprised by the sudden summons. As he settles in, Suma states he has always behaved like an exemplary citizen, but the man cuts him off, saying someone else will explain the details. Then, a woman named Ishtar introduces herself, commenting that she's heard rumors about him, but this is the first time they've met in person. As she walks toward him, Ishtar reveals that in the original game, he was the only level 999 artisan. She continues, stating that he was also the only player to complete every crafting recipe implemented in the system. With that, the woman grabs his chin and adds that since he never flaunted his skills, very few people knew his name. Letting him go, she concludes that it makes perfect sense he was able to forge the Shadow Aegis. Ishtar then sits down and reveals they went to considerable trouble to investigate him thoroughly. It soon becomes clear that she was the one who bought the Shadow Aegis at the auction, making Suma wonder what the reason for this summons could be. Suma stares at her intently, waiting for an answer. Ishtar then says she'll get straight to the point, as they have a demand for him. The demand is that he immediately stops selling counterfeit rare items. Not understanding the accusation, Suma falls silent for a moment. Suma then questions why exactly he should stop selling his items, since they are all genuine, to which Ishtar replies that the reason is obvious. She quickly explains that the reason is because it lowers the value of her collection, and collecting rare items is the main reason she's here. Ishtar continues, stating the value of her precious collection is being undermined, and that the ban applies to all items she might acquire in the future. Outraged, Suma stands up and yells at her to stop saying such ridiculous and nonsensical things. Then, the light blue-haired man intervenes, announcing that Initiator Ishtar wishes to settle this dispute through a trial by dueling. He details that the format will be a public duel in the Grand Arena, where using representatives to fight is also allowed. The boy in the red scarf remains silent as he processes the proposal. As he reflects, he considers that duels to settle disputes are common, but the real problem is her absurd demand. At this, Shika speaks up furiously, reminding him that he needs 100 million to restore her and would never agree to ban the sale of rare items. Suma concludes that refusing the duel would likely be pointless, as she would just interfere in some other way. After a moment, he reconsiders and wonders if, in that case, it wouldn't be better to accept the challenge. He realizes that if they win, they'll get the committee's official approval to sell items, plus the incredible publicity value of a public duel. However, Eve points out a concern, saying that Ishtar's arrogant attitude is hard to believe for an ordinary explorer. Then Shika asks if the initiator class is something special, and Eve clarifies that it's just a starting class exclusive to beginners. Suma then turns and confirms that's exactly what makes her so terrifying. Suma then deduces that, as an explorer, she's nothing special, but rather someone rich who probably hires others to do the heavy lifting. He understands she will certainly hire a representative specialized in combat, and the biggest question is whether they can defeat him. With a smirk, Ishtar pressures him, asking what he'll do and threatening that she'll use other methods if he refuses the duel. Faced with this, Suma accepts the challenge, but sets a condition that if he wins, she must back down completely. Confidently, Ishtar agrees to the term and swears on her own pride. Back in his workshop, Eve questions if the decision was wise, stating that her representative will surely be a very powerful fighter. The android continues, saying that with his combat skills, the chances are minimal, and Suma replies that he already knows that. He then explains that his stats are no different from people at half his level, and that, having no combat skills, he couldn't beat a specialized player. Even so, he states he'll do it for his precious sister, and that he wouldn't have accepted if he didn't believe they had a chance to win. With that, Suma turns to his companion and asks her to be his representative in the duel. The android replies that if it's an order, she has no choice but to obey, but questions if he isn't overestimating her abilities. Eve then reveals that, according to her analysis, that woman's bodyguard has considerable combat skill, and the chance of victory against him is only 30%. Suma cheers up, saying that 30% is more than he expected, leading Eve to conclude he underestimated her and ask if she can punch him. The young man then reminds her that even with a low chance, victory is possible, and recalls that in the fight against the venomous Drake, her performance alone wasn't enough. He then concludes by stating that she only won because she used the equipment he created, as the true source of her strength comes from enhancement through his items. With a smile, Suma explains that the game had many recipes for automaton equipment, and that with the right materials, he can create even the most powerful weapons. Suma then comments that, technically, it's equipment for pet monsters, which leads Eve to suggest that maybe she should wear a collar, making him regret his choice of words. Shika then agrees they would win with the crafted items, but Suma points out that the real problem is where they'll get the materials. Then, the little fairy exclaims that her brain is going to explode, considering they have little time, that buying everything would be expensive, and that some materials aren't even for sale. Suma then reassures her, telling her not to worry, as he has already thought of all these details. With that, he reveals his plan to use the body of a defeated Guignol unit as material to create an exclusive weapon for Eve. Finally, the boy in the red scarf declares that this is their path to victory. With a grinding metal sound, one of the automaton's arms is moved. Then, Suma manages to remove another component and celebrates, saying he got another piece. Holding one of the gears, Shika comments, "It's a good thing others didn't loot all the parts first," and Suma agrees it all went according to plan. He then explains that this is thanks to the labyrinth's self-restoration function, which repairs any damage over time. As he observes the structure, he mentions that because of this, they need to reopen the holes to get in, until Eve's voice calls them. Next, the android approaches with a basket full of parts and announces that the scouting of the area is complete, showing the results. With a smile, Suma thanks her and states that with that amount, they have more than enough materials for the job. Eve then laments that her own weapon generation function isn't operational, as high-level automatons feel their weapons as part of their body. She continues, explaining that unfortunately, this function seems to have been damaged along with her memories, leaving Shika disappointed she can't see it. Suma then reflects that, just as Eve said, some automaton-type monsters have weapon generation abilities. He recalls that especially Grand Guignol Eve, being a raid boss, possessed extraordinarily powerful unique weapons. Then, the boy in the red scarf decides there's nothing they can do about something that's unusable right now. With that in mind, he approaches the android and asks for a moment of her attention. Suma then asks her to confirm she remembers nothing of the past, and Eve replies that memories of herself are inaccessible. However, she reveals there is frozen memory data, and that, if it could be thawed, her weapon function might recover, but Suma advises her not to force herself to remember. Suma then deduces that those are probably memories from when she was an enemy boss. As he concludes it's best not to stimulate her memories carelessly, Eve turns and calls out to him. Suma faces her, awaiting the question. Next, the android asks him if he'll be able to create gear strong enough to win the duel. Eve then declares that Sheikah's chance to become human again is at stake, and a defeat due to insufficient weapon performance is unacceptable. Confidently, Sheikah replies that of course it will be fine. After all, the weapon was made by Suma. With a smile, Suma agrees and tells them to leave the work to him. A short time later, in the crowded arena, the announcer proclaims that the representatives from both sides have entered the ring. On one side, he introduces the collector Ishtar and her representative for the duel, Battlemaster Gilbert. On the other side, the announcer introduces the artisan Suma and his unbelievable representative, the automaton and pet monster Eve. While Sheikah is amazed by the crowd, Suma notices that no one seems to have recognized Eve's true identity, since her appearance is different. The announcer then explains the rules of the duel, defining defeat as when an explorer's HP reaches 0, or when an automaton stops functioning. Battlemaster Gilbert comments that he didn't expect his opponent to be just a pet monster, and that he must have been underestimated. In response, Eve recommends he speak more modestly about his opponent, as it will make it easier to save face after his defeat. While Sheikah cheers for Eve, Suma calculates that the opponent's level is between 80 and 90, concluding that Ishtar brought someone close to the max level. A narrator explains that the max level for hired mercenaries is usually around 80, since stronger explorers prefer the challenges of the deeper floors. As a hired duel representative, he is likely one of the strongest, but Eve still has a chance if she fully utilizes the gear provided. A large wooden mallet is used to start the ceremony. With a loud strike of the gong, the start of the duel is announced to the entire arena. Immediately, Gilbert raises his massive weapon for the first strike. Eve then positions herself to take the direct hit. Then Gilbert strikes the ground and yells for everything to shatter. The impact of the blow raises a huge cloud of dust in the center of the arena. From the stands, Suma shields his face from the wind generated by the explosion. The announcer questions if the duel is already over with such a powerful attack, while Ishtar and her followers watch, protected by a barrier. Gilbert stares into the dust with disdain, awaiting the result of his attack. Amid the smoke, Eve reveals herself completely unharmed, protected by the shadow aegis. Ishtar watches the turn of events in the arena with a subtle smile. Next, Eve activates the shield's special ability, Petrification Wave. Battlemaster Gilbert braces himself for the energy's counterattack. As the energy advances, the announcer explains that a counterattack like petrification would result in immediate defeat, as there are no allies to heal him. However, Battlemaster Gilbert channels his own energy to resist the effect. Then he reveals an item on his wrist and shouts that he came prepared, stating that negative effects won't work on him. With that, Eve dodges another blow, discards the shield, and declares that now it's her turn to attack. Then, the android equips a blade unit on her arm and a flight unit on her back, hovering in the air. Thus, she dashes at high speed toward her opponent. Gilbert then positions his massive sword to defend against the impending attack. The two weapons clash in a direct impact, creating a massive collision of metal. The clash of blades creates an explosion of energy that lights up the entire arena. After the impact, she realizes Gilbert has disappeared and wonders where he could have gone. Suddenly, Gilbert reappears behind her, catching her completely off guard. With a swift movement, the android defends herself with her blades. From the stands, the little fairy watches the scene up close, completely shocked. Despite the attack, Eve notices her blades shattered against the opponent. Next, she retreats and lands at a safe distance as her equipment dissipates. With two new daggers in hand, Gilbert warns her, saying that if she wishes to admit defeat, now would be the time. Even so, the android holds firm in her combat stance. From the stands, Suma reassures the little fairy, telling her everything is okay. Back in the arena, Eve thanks him for the concern, but states there's nothing to worry about. With a smile, Suma declares that the real battle begins now, with the activation of the overload weapon. At that moment, Eve focuses as a new weapon begins to materialize around her. Looking at the new weapon, Gilbert says the real fight starts now, and prepares to attack. With a swift move, he throws his two daggers toward his opponent. Eve then faces the weapons coming her way, completely focused. Then, she easily blocks the daggers with her enormous mechanical arm. In response, Gilbert summons a massive dark energy sword. With the weapon in hand, he charges forward, yelling that he'll have to see her power for himself. The The android then readies her mechanical arms, which start glowing with energy. Eve then fires her fists like projectiles, which collide directly with her opponent's attack. The collision of the two forces creates a massive explosion in the center of the arena. Surprised, Battlemaster Gilbert sees his energy spear crack from the force of the impact. Next, he draws an axe to strike her, but it has no effect. Confidently, the android declares that this arm is her master's masterpiece. Finally, she states that there's no scenario where this weapon can be overcome. With her eyes locked on the target, the android moves in for a direct confrontation. Then, her mechanical fist collides with Gilbert's gauntlet, which shatters on impact. The Battlemaster stumbles back from the blow, while in the stands, Ishtar watches him in shock. Surprised, Gilbert wonders if his equipment was destroyed by an armor-breaking attack. Eve then explains that they had anticipated his countermeasures, which is why her master entrusted her with this specific weapon. She then reveals it's an overload weapon, a type of armament that destroys equipment. The android comments that this might be an unexciting way to end a duel. She then picks up the Dark Aegis and says that for her young master's sake, he will help advertise the product. With that, petrification energy shoots from the shield toward her opponent. Ishtar watches the scene from the stands, completely shocked by the turn of events. The narrator then shouts, asking what just happened in the arena. He then announces it was a comeback with a simply overwhelming finish. The announcer then declares that the winner is the representative of the artisan Suma, the mechanical doll Eve. Ishtar then wonders how anyone could have predicted this ending, where the weakest class ended up winning. As two cloaked figures approach Gilbert's statue, the narrator declares that this was, without a doubt, the end of the duel. From the stands, Suma watches the duel's outcome with a faint smile. The narrator then declares that this moment marks the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the Phantom Labyrinth. A few days later, Sheikah calls out to Suma, impressed by the number of orders they've received. Sheikah asks if all of those are item creation requests, to which Suma confirms the duel was really worth it. With that, the little fairy celebrates that his true power has finally been revealed, saying he deserved to be more famous since the game days. Eve then comments that, setting her master's reputation aside, she has no complaints as long as sales are increasing. The android then warns that from now on, the master will have to work like a horse, but Sheikah intervenes, saying it's all for her, calling him dear brother. Eve argues that since she fought until she lost her arms, it's only fair he works until 5 or 6 of his are torn off, making Suma yell that he doesn't have that many arms. While the two argue, Sheikah watches the scene peacefully. In a calm moment, Sheikah, in her human form, turns to the two and begins to thank them. Suma and Eve watch her in silence during the moment of gratitude. Sheikah then promises to reward them when she's back to normal, but Suma says she owes them nothing, and that her smile is more than enough. Suddenly, a notification pops up, and Eve asks if it's another item creation request. Eve corrects herself, saying it's an auction completion notice, and Suma explains they listed the remaining items after the duel. Eve then concludes that with such a flashy performance in front of so many people, she figured the auction would be a success. The auction notification confirms all items were sold, but the buyer's identity comes as a big surprise. The list of auctioned equipment included items like the Great Obsidian Armor, the Mountain-Shattering Warhammer, and the Black Lotus Necklace. It is then revealed that all the items were bought by the same person, the initiator Ishtar. With a laugh, Suma understands the move and realizes that by buying everything for herself, she ensured the item's rarity wouldn't drop in the market. Beside him, both Sheikah and Eve react to the news with expressions of complete disapproval. Outside, Suma comments that rich people are on another level, but in the end, they landed a very profitable client. A summary of the bids shows the total sales, costs, and fees, leaving the remaining amount for the final goal at just over 89 million. Far away, the mage Ignis walks down a dark alley, cursing his own luck. Seeing a news report about the auction, he recognizes that this is undoubtedly the artisan from that day. He then complains that his life has been a mess ever since, as his companions abandoned him and he can barely explore alone. Suddenly, a mysterious figure appears and comments that the mage Ignis seems to be going through a tough time. The figure then offers his strength, a power sufficient to stand up to the artisan Suma. Though surprised to have his name recognized, Ignis quickly dismisses the matter. Instead, he demands the figure prove his words immediately, threatening him if it's a joke. In the next instant, the mysterious figure attacks him with an energy blade, piercing his body from behind. With his body pierced, the bespectacled mage reacts with pain and surprise to the unexpected attack. As an energy starts to envelop him, Ignis questions what the mysterious figure did to him. In response, the hooded figure tells him to accept the power without any resistance. With that, the energy blade is driven deeper into his back, causing the mage to let out a scream of pure agony. Suma reflects that after the duel, they finally secured 10 million gold, but since that was just a tenth of their goal, It was time for the next step of their plan. Suddenly, the android Eve says she heard what he was planning. Standing in front of a large building, she asks if this is what he meant by the next step. As they enter, Suma confirms he'd had this in mind for a long time, and despite the delays, he felt the time was finally right. Just inside, a man greets them, saying he'd been waiting for Suma the craftsman. The man then asks if he's here to see a property for rent, to which Suma replies he'll decide after an inspection. With that, the realtor explains that although most shops are part of the labyrinth, explorers can also rent buildings to run their own businesses. He continues, saying that running one isn't complicated, as the system handles transactions, and all you have to do is restock the products. Eve then questions the rent of hundreds of thousands, since he could just sell everything digitally for free. Still, Suma replies that there are benefits, and the realtor adds that one of them is being able to operate unattended. The man explains that, unlike a street stall, a rented shop can run without supervision, allowing him to go on expeditions and sell items at the same time. Suddenly, Shika chimes in, asking if something isn't strange about the situation. She points out that this is a prime property in a busy location, and questions why a place like this would be completely vacant. At this, Eve stares at the realtor and points out that he hesitated, but the man denies it, assuring them the property is perfectly safe. Trying to deflect, he starts listing the location's qualities, like the residential area, huge storage space, and a spacious shop with an elevator. Looking nervous, the realtor begins to explain the property's issue. He then reveals there's a ridiculous rumor that the place is haunted, leaving everyone shocked. While the little fairy panics, the man tries to calm her, insisting it's just a groundless rumor. Hesitantly, he lists the stories people tell, like the ghost of a woman wandering the halls and customers disappearing. With a smile, Suma says he'd love to meet a real ghost, as Shika recalls he isn't scared of horror, and he tries to rationalize the events. The boy in the red scarf then suggests it might be a prank by an explorer, or perhaps a ghost-type monster that has surfaced. Still, Suma says he'd personally prefer a real ghost, much to Shika's dismay. With that, he decides to create some anti-ghost items as a precaution, like holy water and talismans. Suddenly, a translucent figure begins to form behind the counter. A moment later, the form of a ghostly woman fully materializes in the middle of the room. Seeing the apparition, the little fairy lets out a scream of pure terror. In a panic, Shika tells Suma she's seeing something, but he only notices a butterfly passing by. The boy in the red scarf looks where she's pointing and says there's nothing there. Realizing it's a real ghost, the fairy despairs, but Suma tells her to calm down. Calmly, he explains that many ghost-type monsters can turn invisible. Eve then remembers her scouting skills are always active, but Suma explains that as a fairy, it's natural for Shika to see things they can't. Suma concludes that what she's seeing is the source of the rumors, and asks Shika where the apparition is right now. The little fairy then looks around, trying to locate the creature's position. Soon, she reports that the figure is standing next to the counter and doesn't seem to be moving. Understanding the situation, Suma decides they'll split up to search for other ghost-type monsters on the premises. Though scared, Shika clutches one of the talismans he handed her. Next, Suma explains that even if they can't see them, the anti-spirit tools will work, and they can use the holy water as soon as the talisman reacts. He then hands a vial to the realtor and asks for his help, leaving the man unsure how to refuse. The realtor then reveals they've tried various anti-ghost countermeasures before, but nothing worked. Hearing that, the little fairy becomes visibly worried. Shika approaches the counter, believing the talisman should react if it were a ghost-type monster. Carefully, she brings the large talisman close to the translucent apparition. Even up close, the paper remains completely inert in her hands. The fairy stares at the scene with wide eyes, not understanding what's happening. Panicked, she shouts that there was no reaction, concluding that it isn't a monster. Scared, Shika argues that even if it's not a monster, that doesn't prove it's a ghost either, suggesting it might just be an illusion spell. Still, she keeps holding the talisman in front of the apparition. Suddenly, the little fairy feels something watching them from somewhere, maybe from behind the counter. So she flies behind the counter to investigate, but sees nothing. Right after, a pool of darkness begins to form on the floor. A shadowy hand then emerges from the pool and grabs the little fairy by surprise. The creature then pulls her into the darkness. The talisman falls to the floor as the little fairy is engulfed by the shadow and screams for help. Before disappearing completely, she manages to scream Suma's name. On the floor, the talisman remains inert, while the ghostly apparition stays in the same spot. Elsewhere, as she's pulled into the darkness, she realizes the talisman didn't react again. With that, she concludes this isn't a ghost-type monster either, and wonders what the hell it is. Suddenly, she focuses her gaze on something in the darkness. Soon, the creature's true form is revealed, holding the little fairy in its hand. Outside, Suma concludes that something is definitely inside that building. Back inside, he states that Shika isn't the type of person to tell pointless lies. Next, he explains that to identify the creature, they need to eliminate the possibilities one by one, starting by ruling out a ghost-type monster with the talisman. With a faint smile, he recalls that as a child he wished ghosts existed, but in the end, the dead never came to see him. Even assuming the labyrinth is a special case, he decides not to think about it and calls for Shika so they can go. Realizing she's not around, the boy in the red scarf turns and calls her name again. Suddenly, Shika's voice echoes from the darkness, yelling that it's not a ghost, not even a ghost-type monster. Then she reveals that the monster is actually a spirit-type monster, the dark spirit Lampas. Shika then explains that the countermeasures didn't work because, despite its appearance, the creature is a completely different species. She continues, saying a Lampas in the shadows can be driven out with a strong light from outside, but from the inside, she can't do anything. Before losing consciousness, the little fairy begs for Suma to notice and help her. In a flashback, Shika narrates that, to be honest, she was very anxious and a little scared when she met Suma. She continues, recalling she was too young at the time to understand death or why her parents' friend's son was coming to live at her house. Even trying to be a good girl, she felt like her family and her home were being taken from her, and she hated it a little. It was during that time that she got lost and couldn't get back home after dark. The girl narrates that, on that night, she seriously thought she was going to die just like that. Suddenly, the red-eyed boy appeared with a flashlight to look for her. She then reveals she'll never forget that day, and that to her, Suma is her family, or even more important than that. At that moment, the dark spirit Lampas is hit by several beams of light. With that, the monster lets out a cry of pain, releasing the little fairy from its grasp. Then, the light blue-haired girl gives a relieved smile. Next, she flies toward the light while shouting Suma's name. The little fairy keeps calling for him as she gets closer to the light source. As she emerges from the darkness, she returns to her tiny form and lands on the boy's hand. She then looks at him, still recovering from what just happened. As the creature dissolves into a puddle, Suma says he's glad she's safe. Even in defeat, the dark spirit tries to rise again and threatens that they won't escape. Suddenly, a blade of golden energy appears and blocks the creature's attack. The energy blast hits the monster head-on, undoing its shadowy form. With the weapon in his hands, Suma declares the monster chose the wrong opponent and orders it to disappear. With the final blow, the dark creature turns to ash and vanishes completely. While the broker is surprised by the creature's true identity, Suma explains he figured it all out because the talisman he gave Shika had fallen to the floor. He then details that since the creature that took her looked like a ghost, but wasn't, the first suspicion fell on a dark spirit. Then, he reveals he first drove it out with the light of the sun mirror, and then crushed it with the divine gauntlet, as Eve questions why the spirit would have targeted her. Suma then suggests it was probably because she saw it, leaving the little fairy confused. At this, Shika remembers that the first ghostly figure she saw was watching them from afar, from behind the counter. She then realizes that when she tried to see where the gaze was coming from, the dark spirit attacked her, which means there were two apparitions all along. The little fairy then turns, frightened, in the direction of the other ghostly figure. As the broker and the android watch, the apparition begins to dissolve into particles of light. Before vanishing completely, the ghostly figure seems to shed a tear and thanks them. At that moment, the little fairy suddenly remembers the rumors about an adventurer who disappeared after being attacked by a ghost. She concludes the ghost was actually the adventurer killed by the dark spirit, and that maybe he wanted someone to avenge him. Far away, in a dark place, a voice yells in disbelief that the dark spirit was defeated. Then the person questions why that happened, stating it wasn't what was supposed to occur. From above, another hooded figure laughs and shouts that it served them right. The hooded figure criticizes the plan, saying it was too indirect to hide a spirit in a shop to attack a craftsman. He then asks if the person is an idiot, and if it wouldn't have been faster to use their magic, to which the other replies that doing something so flashy on the surface would be dangerous. The figure then agrees the plan itself wasn't bad, as it's more effective to hurt those around the target to make them suffer. With a slight smile, he gets closer and closer. Revealing his face, he states that the failure to complete the job was disappointing, and introduces himself as Diablo. Afraid, the other figure calls him Master Diablo and asks why he's there without warning. Diablo then calls out the mage Ignis. Next, he turns to the predator Hayato. With a menacing look, Diablo asks if they've forgotten why he gave them power, and warns them not to disappoint him again. In response, Hayato stammers that he understands, and that next time he definitely won't fail. Suddenly, another voice tells Ignis to back off. The new figure declares that it's their turn now, and that the other should just watch with his tail between his legs. Finally, the creature reveals itself and yells that the great Hayato will be the one to slaughter the damned craftsman. About half a month after the ghost incident, a crowd was forming in front of the new shop. The shop had finally opened, and as he planned, the public duel against the collector Ishtar became the perfect advertisement for the business. Inside, he crafted items to sell in the shop and used the money to buy more materials, keeping the production cycle going. Most of the 10 million he had saved was invested in renovating the shop and buying materials for the initial stock. That level of spending was just a necessary expense, an initial investment to make even more money in the future. Thanks to all the popularity, the shop's daily sales reached 2 million in gold, which would get them close to their 100 million goal in about 3 months. While Suma worried about the business slowing down, he wonders why she had to repeat the same thing twice. With the shop finally stabilized, he decides it might be time to start taking creation requests again, to which Shika says she has a recommendation. Soon, little Shika suggests a request, and he reads that it's from the Automaton Enthusiast Club. Eve then points out the request is to create equipment for automatons, and since the reward doesn't seem worth it, she asks why Shika chose it. A little embarrassed, little Shika explains that this is something a bit personal for her. She then reveals that the club's president is a girl she used to explore with a lot, but hasn't been able to keep in touch with lately. With an expectant look, Shika then asks if he's going to say no. Without hesitating, Suma replies that he has no objections and agrees to take the request, much to Shika's delight. A short time later, the boy in the red scarf and the android sit at a table to wait for the client. While waiting, Suma worried about what kind of people they would meet, but Shika soon announces that the clients are approaching. Then, a figure starts walking toward their table. A cleric named Violet then approaches and asks if he is the explorer's older brother. At this, Shika greets her excitedly as Sumira-chan, making the cleric react with surprise that she used her real name. The cleric then asks if she's really Shika, and the little fairy confirms she had already told her in the messages, though the other didn't believe her. Still surprised by the situation, Suma asks the client to explain everything in more detail. Violet explains that they are basically an automaton enthusiast club, while the other clerics comment that the recent duel was amazing. Next, the club members approach Eve to closely analyze every detail of her mechanical construction. The cleric then reveals their goal is to dress their dolls in the best possible outfits, completely ignoring Shika's presence. The meeting continues at a table in the middle of the bustling square. From above, the feeling that something was watching the meeting begins to grow. Suma then senses a strange presence approaching and looks up. In that instant, Hayato descends from the sky in his new form and charges directly at the artisan. With a swift movement, the creature's claws grab Suma's head, but he resists the attack. However, the predator is thrown forcefully against the wall of a nearby building. As the dust settled, a crowd of people watched the scene in complete silence. With a victorious smile, Hayato yells that it served the artisan right. Lying on the ground, Suma recognizes the voice and wonders if a human could really have become a monster. Then, Hayato reveals he came back to kill him for good by abandoning his human body to obtain this new power. Suddenly, a wave of energy forms on the ground, right beneath the two of them. With that, the predator grabs Suma and carries him high into the sky, flying over the city. Hayato then admits the artisan is strong, but claims he won't survive the fall damage from this height. Right after, he lets go of the boy in the red scarf and says goodbye with a yell. However, the predator lets out a cry of surprise upon realizing something was wrong. Hayato then yells for the artisan to just fall already, but realizes he is still clinging to his leg. With a smile, Suma tells him not to worry, as he will fall the right way. In that instant, he combines a blank magic paper with a thunder beast's fur. While creating a new item, Suma warns that the predator is coming down with him. With that, a lightning spell scroll materializes and wraps itself around Hayato. A huge explosion of energy then lights up the sky, making the creature scream in pain. The spell's energy completely envelops Predator Hayato's body. Next, the artisan Suma is also hit by the electrical discharge as they both fall. From the sky, both of their bodies plummet toward the city below. Even injured, Hayato manages to recover and tells the artisan not to get cocky, treating the attack as just a small greeting. While still in free fall, Suma concludes that things aren't over yet. He then realizes he doesn't have the materials to craft an item that would let him fly, and that he'll have to improvise to reduce the fall damage. With that, he decides that anything is better than turning into a splattered tomato on the ground. Suddenly, as he was preparing his creation cube, a hand appears and stops him from falling further. The boy in the red scarf is then held firmly by someone else in midair. Soon he finds himself rescued by a paladin in full armor and another mysterious figure. Upon being saved, Suma recognizes Paladin Oliver, who immediately demands an explanation for what the hell happened. With a smile, the boy in the red scarf suggests they can talk once they're back on the ground. Suddenly, a communication call appears on his screen, interrupting the conversation. A familiar voice greets him, saying it's been a long time since they've seen each other. Suma reacts with surprise as he recognizes the person on the other end of the line. While observing the chaos through the window, a figure comments that the commotion was quite flashy and that because of it, the surface is in total chaos. Then, the person turns around and asks him to explain everything in detail. Soon, the man introduces himself as the Runic Knight, Altair. Finally, Altair, a member of the Ghost Labyrinth's Autonomous Committee Combat Unit, demands the explanation be given right at that very moment. As the crowd runs desperately, a man laments that the rumors of a human turning into a monster were true. Amidst the panic, Violet gets annoyed and wonders how far the fleeing person got by selling their items. Then, the cleric yells that the entire city is in a panic and that they need to make way while Sheikah asks her to wait. With that, little Sheikah happily announces that the message is from Soma and that he seems to be okay. Right after, Eve warns Violet that it might be too soon to relax. The android then adds that things seem about to get complicated as a crowd of explorers forms in the street. In a room, Altair apologizes for summoning the artisan Soma so suddenly. Before him, Suma Sayotome waits in silence with his arms crossed. Then, Altair introduces himself as the commander of the Guardians and states that he has a few things to ask. Suma replies that he doesn't mind, but taunts him by saying the cape doesn't suit him. Suma's gaze remains fixed and confident. Altair's expression remains calm and analytical. With a smile, the commander just says that he expected that attitude. Then Altair explains he got the position for being the strongest volunteer on the committee, while Suma suggests he should have refused. Next, the commander gets straight to the point and asks about the Birdman monster, stating that Suma seemed to know what it really was. Altair states he doesn't care who the monster was, and demands to know if the story of humans turning into monsters is true. Suma is surprised by how quickly they found out, but the commander explains it was luck, since one of his subordinates was on the scene. Next, Altair reveals that rumors about monstrification already existed, making Suma wonder if other people have turned too. The commander then informs him that half of those rumors started with him, and Suma admits he wasn't really trying to hide his investigations. With that, he confirms he's been asking questions around the city to dig up clues on the matter. Altair concludes that after what happened, these rumors could become fact, and that mass panic will be inevitable. At that exact moment, the door bursts open and Violet enters the room shouting that the situation is bad. The cleric runs towards Suma as he turns to look at her. As soon as she gets close, she informs him that the material shops in town are in complete chaos. Outside, a crowd questions the stock of crystal lapis lazuli and complains about the price of elixirs. Amidst the chaos, everyone rushes to check the stock of scalding blood, determined to buy whatever they can. Facing the scene, Violet says the situation is obviously bad, leading Suma to ask if everyone is trying to buy materials for the Philosopher's Stone. He then realizes that the news about monstrification has spread, along with the information that the Philosopher's Stone can cure it. At this, Eve approaches and says she doesn't understand the situation, since only her master can actually create the item. The android finishes her thought, questioning how people plan to turn the materials into a Philosopher's Stone, even if they manage to gather them. Suma concludes their impulse buying is useless, since they haven't even turned into monsters, and defines the movement as panic buying. Then he realizes that if the stock runs out, he won't be able to help Sheikah anymore, making Violet ask what they'll do. He then mentions that the most expensive material, the elixir of Mercurius, costs tens of millions and wouldn't run out in a few days. Even so, Eve warns that they now have a time limit and won't make the money if they take 3 months to save up 100 million. After a moment, Suma decides they need to go back to the shop to come up with a new plan. Back at the shop, Eve awaits her master's new instructions. With Sheikah on the counter, Suma announces the new plan, estimating they have 1 month to gather all the necessary materials. Eve then questions if this is a realistic goal, although she understands it's their only option. He replies that the only way is to create and sell even higher value items, and that he already has a target in mind. Next, Suma displays a map and explains that the Phantom Labyrinth is divided into 3 layers: upper, middle, and lower. With that, he points out that so far they've only explored the middle floors, and that to speed things up, they'll need to go to the lower floors. His finger selects the image of the deepest and most dangerous layer of the labyrinth. Then, Sheikah protests, stating that the lower layers are too dangerous. Sheikah suggests it would be better to wait for the shops to restock, but Suma reminds her that could take years. Faced with the impasse, Eve asks Sheikah to confirm if the lower floors are really that dangerous. Sheikah explains the place is filled with fire dragons and poison drakes, making it a challenge for people at levels 700 and 800. Suma retorts that the rewards are huge, because with the materials from there, they can create weapons worth millions. Next, he reveals he's been to the lower floors with friends back in his gaming days, which surprises Sheikah since she's never heard that. He then comments that his old raid partners live there and that they'll surely help him if he explains the situation. Despite recognizing the high risk, Eve asks her master for permission for them to go to the lower floors. Then, the android reinforces her dedication, making Sheikah accept the decision, since he'll be counting on his friend's help. Eve says she's on Sheikah's side and tells Suma to get ready, while he promises he won't do anything reckless. A panel displays the shop's financial status, showing that 83,000 G are still needed to reach the goal. A few days later, an elevator door opens into a dark environment. Inside the elevator, Suma thanks him for the ride, explaining they were never able to get a shortcut pass to the lower floors. A man in armor replies that it was nothing and that he was already training his party in those layers. Then, the explorer asks if Sheikah has ever been to the lower floors, and she replies that she always considered it endgame content. The man then advises her to prepare for what's to come. Sheikah's face shows her apprehension at the warning. Upon arriving, the explorer declares that from this point on, the normal rules no longer apply. The explorer explains that unlike the upper layers' caves and forests, the lower layers' environment is unlike anything found underground. Standing before an elevator on a floating island, Sheikah questions how they could explore a place where you need to fly to reach the next island. Little Sheikah is visibly shaken by the prospect of the challenge. At that moment, the explorer spots a creature and identifies it as a Quetzalcoatl, calling for Will at just the right time. The archer named Will then confirms the order and fires an energy arrow. As soon as the shot passes by the creature, the group's leader shouts for Mari and Kreutz to act. Next, the two of them race forward on a flying broom toward the monster. The pair manages to pluck 2 feathers from the creature in midair and celebrate their successful capture. The explorer notes there are many ways to cross the sky, but Suma steps forward and asks for a second to use the Quetzalcoatl feather as the main material. With that, he creates a custom boat made from the newly acquired feathers. Once on the boat, the group leader says his goodbyes and tells them he can only accompany them this far, but offers one last piece of advice. The final warning is that there are rumors of Diablo appearing in the lower layer, putting Suma and Sheikah on alert. As they move away, Eve asks what kind of monster Diablo is, and Suma reveals he's not a monster, but a human. He then explains that Diablo is a player killer, a serial killer who exclusively targets explorers. Finally, Suma concludes that while killing other players in the game wasn't a big deal, Diablo has now started killing real people in reality. Sheikah mentions she's heard of him, a veteran who knows the game's mechanics and abuses that knowledge, leading Suma to consider the situation problematic. Sheikah then worries about the possibility of other people turning into monsters and about their materials running out, while Suma agrees that the Predator's case can't be ignored. As he reflects on finding a way to reverse the transformation without the stone, a gigantic monster appears before the boat. The creature lunges forward and attacks the vessel with a vicious bite. With the boat damaged, Suma is stunned to recognize the creature as a wyvern grandis that has appeared at a terrible time. As the boat falls toward a lava mountain, Eve asks her master if he can stabilize it. Suma replies that the monster would just attack them again anyway and decides they'll make a crash landing. With that, the vessel crashes violently against the rocks of the volcanic island. The vessel is left destroyed amidst the smoke after the impact. Inside the wreckage, Suma and Eve recover from the fall. Sheikah expresses her relief upon realizing they survived the fall. Suddenly, a massive pillar of energy erupts near the crash site. Right after, a colossal figure made of rock and energy rises before them. Quickly, Suma signals for silence while holding Sheikah to keep her from making a sound. Eve also gestures for silence as a giant shadow passes over them. Suddenly, a voice says, "Oh, it's just you guys," which startles Suma and makes Eve let out a scream. A barbarian named Ban explains that he saw something strange fall from the sky and recognized a familiar face, considering it a rare sight. Ban then asks what brought him here alone, since Suma had rejected him when he invited him to explore the labyrinth. While Eve complains that she's stuck, Suma explains to the newcomer that they have their own circumstances. With that, Ban understands that while he was in the lower layer, things on the surface went completely crazy. He questions the concern over the philosopher's stone materials, mentioning that there are many mutual aid organizations for explorers. Suma retorts that if those groups use their emergency funds, even the cheapest crystal coral will run out in an instant. Faced with the situation, he activates his creation cube to present a solution. Suma then forges a custom sword called Crimson Edge and proposes that Ban buy it to help him out. To the craftsman's surprise, the barbarian immediately and directly refuses the offer. The massive sword he created remains stuck in the ground after the rejection. At this, Ban explains he only uses battle axes, and Suma admits he can't get the materials to forge a stronger one. The barbarian then states it'll be hard to sell weapons to the explorers here, but Suma says the chances are still better than on the surface. Ban suggests he needs some flashy advertising, and then advises him to sell consumable items like recovery ones. At the suggestion, Sheikah recalls that even Oliver's group had to return to the surface to restock on supplies. Eve agrees with the idea, and suggests there might also be a demand for spell scrolls, prompting Ban to say he'd buy both. Suma concludes that selling supplies won't be enough to reach their goal in time, agreeing they need advertising to attract the local explorers. Therefore, he declares he will fight the lower layers monsters alone to get the materials. Sheikah panics and questions him, but Suma apologizes and insists that no matter how much he thinks about it, this is the best way. He then explains that fighting and showing off the weapons in action has always been their best form of advertising. Eve adds to that thought, stating that what always changed their situation was a live demonstration sale. When Ban suggests someone else fight, Suma explains that it's precisely because he's the fighter that the product's performance stands out. With that, Ban offers to at least help gather materials, and Suma thanks him for the support. And so, a structure is driven into the ground to mark the start of their operations. With a confident smile, Suma announces that the special lower layer branch of the craftsman's workshop is officially open. Before them, a greater Trent monster appears, with a recommended party level of 700. Nearby, two explorers complain that the creature has already bloomed, making the battle more annoying due to its negative effects. Unwilling to return to the surface, the pair considers using brute force or finding an Archbishop-class healer to help them. Just then, Suma runs past them, causing one of the adventurers to shout and question what he's doing. Without answering, he leaps straight off the cliff towards the monster. During the fall, he spins his body and gathers energy for the imminent attack. With a swift movement, he slices off one of the treant's tentacles. As he lands, his bracelets activate with a red energy. The monster watches its severed tentacle burn and disintegrate. Right after, Suma raises his sword, which emits a powerful energy. The creature then whips another tentacle in his direction. In a single blow, he dashes forward and unleashes an energy slash that tears through the monster's body. The two explorers watch in shock, with one of them questioning if he was really a craftsman, while one of them doubts anyone could defeat that monster in a single hit. His partner insists he's a real craftsman. Facing the creature's remains, the explorer approaches and asks how a craftsman managed to defeat that monster. Suma replies with a smile that he obviously did it with items he crafted himself. He then begins to explain that he used a strengthening and resistance potion made from a rare fruit. Next, he reveals he used the Fairy King's scarf, an enhanced version of the protective item, to block the negative effects. He then adds that he stacked extra physical buffs with a bracelet and an anklet, finishing with the Crimson Edge sword. Hearing this, the pair of explorers considers the gear powerful and decides to buy it, since they were low on potions and the sword would be a good backup weapon. The list of sold items includes the sword for 1 million, the scarf for 200,000, and the accessories for 300,000 each. The total sale, including several high-quality potions, comes to 2 million G. Once the deal is done, the two adventurers say their goodbyes and head on their way through the forest. Right after the sale, Suma lets out a tired sigh. He then admits that strengthening his craftsman's body puts a huge strain on him. As he reflects, he recalls that, just as Ban had said, explorers from the lower stratum wouldn't pay attention to a common sales pitch. However, he realizes that the live demonstrations worked perfectly, earning 2 million in just a few minutes of fighting. Hiding behind a rock, Sheikah and Eve watch him, with little Sheikah calling his name in a worried tone. He then decides he'll go from island to island repeating his equipment demonstrations, like using a shield to show off its defensive and recovery power. With this new strategy, he manages to sell a large shield and more potions, totaling a sale of 1,900,000 G. In another demonstration, he outran a pack of lycanthropes just to showcase the mobility of his items. With that, he sold 3 pairs of Hermes boots and 20 stamina drinks, totaling a sale of 3,100,000 G. Right after, he used a high-quality pickaxe for a new demonstration and accidentally awakened something underground. This new opportunity resulted in the sale of 5 adamantine pickaxes and the relics he unearthed, generating 2,800,000 G. Finally, with a box of scrolls in hand, Suma states that this should be enough. He then explains that with Ban's help gathering materials, he got spell scrolls totaling over 10 million, as the barbarian celebrates the hard work. With his goal nearly reached, Suma announces he'll do one last round and leaves Eve and Sheikah in charge of the rest. As she watches him walk away, little Sheikah comments that her brother Soma is definitely overworking himself. Sheikah then regrets that if she had known it would be like this, she wouldn't have said she wanted to be human again, prompting Eve to call her name. The android states that not saving him simply isn't an option, and asks if Sheikah wouldn't do the same if their positions were reversed. Next, Eve advises her to say what he would want to hear instead, which wouldn't be an apology. Advising little Sheikah, the android says the right word to say would be, "Thank you." Afterward, Eve declares that they will support their hopeless master so that all his efforts won't be in vain. On a new island, an ice golem walks through a snowy landscape. From above, Suma leaps down to attack the creature. With a devastating blow, the weapon crafted by Suma strikes the ice golem's head squarely. The ice creature staggers from the force of the impact, but manages to stay on its feet. With weapon in hand, Suma declares that the field test is complete, and now he just needs to find a buyer. Unexpectedly, the golem starts to move again, forcing Suma to back away. Suma is stunned to realize the creature can still move after that blow. Then, the ice creature raises its fist to deliver a direct attack. At the moment of the attack, Suma realizes his strengthening enchantments have worn off. With no time to react, he just watches as the monster's fist descends towards him. At the last second, Eve saves her master, shielding him from the impact. Worried, Sheikah asks if he's okay, while Eve states it was a good idea they came to check on the situation. Eve then scolds him, saying it's unacceptable for him to miscalculate his own limits, making him admit his mistake. At this, Sheikah suggests the three of them can take down the golem together, but she's cut off by a red flash in the sky. Immediately after, a massive beam of red energy streaks across the battlefield at high speed. The attack hits the golem dead on, completely disintegrating it in a blast of energy. Facing the smoking crater, Sheikah comments that for a moment, she seriously thought she was dead. Amid the devastated landscape, Suma wonders how the snowfield could have evaporated in an instant, starting to recognize the attack's origin. With that, red and black energy erupts from the crater as an overwhelming power manifests. From the ground, a colossal Inferno Elder Dragon emerges, an imposing creature made of rock and flame. Facing the monster, which has a recommended level of 9999 for a party of 12, Eve turns to her master and asks for his orders. Without hesitation, Suma yells for them to run as fast as they can, as Sheikah agrees there's no way they can fight that. After escaping, they take shelter in an ice mountain cave. On a video call, Ban expresses his surprise that they found an ancient dragon, a rare monster, on their very first day. Eve suggests he should have defeated the dragon for materials, but Suma refuses, saying he would have been turned to ash in a second. On the other end of the call, Oliver deduces that Suma doesn't intend to waste this opportunity. The paladin then agrees to at least hear the plan, since he went to the trouble of contacting them. While Ban complains about Suma's tone, the craftsman himself admits his own way of speaking gave him the creeps. With that, Suma asks them to spread some news to the other explorers nearby. He then reveals the information to be shared. An ancient Inferno dragon has appeared on Snow Island. Upon hearing the news, Ban and Oliver conclude that leaking this information will make the proudest guilds move to claim the kill. Eve immediately understands the strategy, stating that preparing for a hunt of that scale creates a massive demand for items. With the plan set, Suma decides they will gather materials with everything they've got, while the others handle the propaganda. He then reflects on the story of the gold rush, where the biggest profits went not to the gold miners, but to those who sold the pickaxes. Even without knowing if the story is true, Suma states that he felt a strong confidence in that sales strategy. In the middle of a city's ruins, Suma asks Sheikah if she's found anything. While little Sheikah says the item should be around here, Eve comments that, as expected, the rare golden crystal skull wouldn't be found easily. He then explains that if used as a crafting material, the final item's selling price will easily exceed 3 million, making its capture essential. After searching for a while, Suma comments that they've been on a good streak and suggests they take a short break to rest. However, their moment of rest is interrupted by a shower of feather-shaped projectiles falling from the sky. The feathers hit the ground with force, kicking up a large cloud of dust and debris on impact. After the attack ends, several feathers remain stuck in the ground around them. Amidst the dust, Suma begins to wonder if that attack could have been from who he thought it was. Suddenly, a laugh echoes from the heavens as a large gray wing appears in the air. Soon, the predator appears in his monstrous form and shouts that they meet again. Craftsman, one of the feathers he uses as a weapon, glows with intense energy. The monster then accuses him of spreading strange rumors, saying that thanks to that, it was easy to find him. Next, he guarantees there won't be a second time and that he will kill him for sure. With that, the feather arrow is shot at extremely high speed towards Suma. The projectile multiplies in midair, turning into a volley of several arrows. As he watches the attack, Suma calls him a persistent bastard and prepares a crafting item. The object in his hand materializes into a mechanical device with rotating blades. With the whirlwind buckler item, Suma creates a whirlwind that sucks in all the arrows, leaving the predator surprised. Right after, a hooded figure appears and says he is no longer the mage Ignis, while the predator calls him pathetic. Facing the new threat, Suma readies himself for battle with his bow. The figure then reveals his new monstrous form, the high-ranking spirit monster named Ignis Fatuus. The monster declares he has never forgotten the battle, and that if the craftsman begs for mercy, he will have a painless death. At this, the predator complains to Ignis Fatuus to stop giving himself such weird names. Ignoring the comment, the creature launches an energy sphere directly at its ally. He then warns them not to think he's the same, as this is the new magic he obtained by abandoning his humanity. Next, he uses his new ability and summons multiple magic circles around him. The monster then asks if the craftsman can handle the elemental spirits imbued with his high-level magic. With the summoning, 4 elemental spirits appear on the battlefield. The first to introduce itself is the fire creature, the salamander. Right after, the wind spirit, the sylph, manifests. Next, the water creature, the undine, appears. Finally, the earth spirit, the gnomes, complete the summoning. Without hesitation, Suma activates multiple creation cubes at the same time to prepare his defense. With this, he materializes 4 shields corresponding to each of the summoned elements. Soon, the spirits advance and attack the shields with their respective powers. The 4 spirits collide simultaneously against Suma's protective barriers. Ignis Fatuus then celebrates that the ability to nullify the 4 elements is what makes revenge worthwhile. Next, he prepares to summon new elements and orders his servants to attack. The first to be summoned is the light creature, Aurora. Right after, the thunder spirit, Electra, manifests. The nature spirit, Dryad, appears next. Finally, the darkness creature, Lampas, appears on the battlefield. Sheikah then recognizes the creatures and yells that they are the same ones from the ghost commotion. Beside her, Suma finally understands how everything is connected. With that, the new spirits advance to attack all at once. Protecting Eve, Suma wields a new weapon and states that it was Ignis who sent the monsters to attack Sheikah. He then continues, saying he's interested in knowing how they became monsters. But first, Suma declares he will cut them down. Next, he unleashes his fatal vortex attack and warns that he'll listen to their story if they survive. Seeing the danger, the predator decides he can't handle it and flees, causing Ignis Fatuus to call him a coward. With that, Suma hands an item to Eve and orders her to take care of the Birdman. The android then extends her hand, which begins to glow with an intense energy. Soon, her arm transforms into the custom combat unit, Lightning Culverin. As soon as she aims, Eve announces that the target has been acquired. The android then fires a powerful energy beam from her weapon. At the same time, Suma turns to launch his own attack against the monster on the ground. The vortex of blades descends at high speed directly onto the 2 creatures. Ignis Fatuus tries to protect himself with his hands in a desperate act. The predator is also caught off guard by the attack's magnitude. A massive explosion engulfs the 2 monsters, who scream in pain from the impact. When the attack ends, a large cloud of dust covers the entire battlefield. Suma then wonders how the 2 of them can still be alive, finding the situation more troublesome than he imagined. On the ground, the predator and Ignis Fatuus lie defeated and motionless after the attack. Soon, Suma demands that they tell him in detail how they ended up in that state, but Sheikah tries to stop him. Suddenly, a rift of dark energy opens in the sky, interrupting the interrogation. From within the rift, a voice comments that he expected this one-sided massacre and that it was a miserable fight from the start. With that, Suma turns and recognizes the figure who has just arrived. He then identifies him as the player killer, Diablo. Diablo then wonders if his true identity has already been exposed. Suma and Eve stay on guard against the new enemy. In his mind, the artisan labels him a serial killer who continues his activities even in the real world's labyrinth. The newcomer then comments that he heard he was hiding in the lower levels, but didn't expect to find him there. Shika tries to analyze the class of the opponent appearing before them. The analysis is met with interference, preventing a full data read. Shika then reports that she could only identify him as a Reaper, an advanced assassin class, leading Suma to conclude that concealment is one of his specialties. Suma then asks him directly if he was the one who sent the two monsters to attack them. In response, Diablo explains that he only gave them power and that they chose to kill of their own free will. He then reveals that he thought it would be fun to act as the mastermind behind it all, but watching the fight changed his mind. Suma, Shika, and Eve brace themselves for the imminent confrontation. With a smile, Diablo declares that he now wants to kill the artisan with his own hands. Before the battle, Suma stops him and says he has one last question. He then asks if it was Diablo who turned Ignis and Hayato into monsters. Confirming the suspicion, Diablo reveals an energy scythe and says that's exactly what he meant by giving them power. With the scythe in hand, Diablo challenges him, saying he might tell him the details if he can defeat him. Suma then yells that's exactly what he'll do, as Eve fires a shot from her weapon. The energy beam crosses the sky and hits a floating island in the distance. Amidst the bolts appearing in the air, Diablo recognizes the attack as the lightning culverin. He then states he knows the weapon well, including its charge time and the signs before it fires. With a quick glance, the Reaper prepares to counterattack. In an agile move, he blocks the vortex of blades with his scythe and asks if the artisan has mastered the weapon yet. Faced with the block, Suma reacts with a click of frustration. At this, Diablo announces that now it's his turn, as multiple dark portals open behind him. He then takes a stance and spins his scythe to launch a massive attack. From the portals, dozens of dark energy blades are fired simultaneously. Little Shika watches the overwhelming scale of the attack with a panicked look. Next, the crescent execution technique descends from the heavens like a rain of blades. At the last moment, Suma summons the sanctuary staff and creates a protective energy barrier around them. Protected inside the sanctuary, Shika expresses her relief, realizing they were saved just in time. Suma's gaze locks onto the enemy, ready for the next move. With that, he charges forward and blocks Diablo's scythe with his staff, creating sparks on impact. The artisan then furiously asks if he was the one who attacked Shika. Diablo then replies with a smile that taking out the scout first is just standard tactics. The Reaper then presses the attack with his scythe, while Eve prepares to intercept him. With a smile, Diablo disintegrates before them. Behind her, Suma realizes the magic attack was just a feint for a surprise attack in the dust, calling it a dirty trick. He then reflects that he can overcome any weapon Diablo uses, just as the enemy can nullify any of his own. From above, Diablo comments that's why the battle is interesting, but states it's time to break the stalemate. At this, Suma questions what kind of dagger that is, since a weapon like it shouldn't exist in the game. Diablo then pierces a crow with the dagger, making the creature bleed. The crow's body begins to transform, its wings and claws growing abnormally. In just a few seconds, the creature turns into a griffin, to Suma's surprise. With a swift move, Suma attacks the newly created griffin. He then confirms that there's no doubt that dagger is what turned Shika into a monster. The dagger glows with a sinister energy, revealing its dangerous nature. Suddenly, a giant, worm-like creature emerges from the ground before Suma. The monster attacks immediately, forcing Suma to jump back to dodge the blow. He then realizes that Diablo's attacks will keep coming one after another. On the ground, the dagger remains stuck, pulsating with a mysterious energy. From above, Diablo claims the one with an unknown trump card will decide this fight. The moment he says that Suma might have an unknown trump card, Eve appears and attacks him by surprise. The Reaper manages to dodge Eve's attack at the last second. Seeing Eve fighting alone, Shika desperately cries out her name. While Shika begs her to retreat, the android refuses to obey. Eve then declares that her master's survival is her top priority, as that is Shika's wish. At this, Shika understands that this is a worthy reason to fight the Reaper. Sarcastically, Diablo comments that their story is so moving, it brings him to tears. With that, Eve braces herself and fires an energy beam from her gauntlet. Diablo then blocks the attack with his scythe, while Eve defends herself with her combat weapons. In the background, Suma and Shika watch the fight with expressions of shock and concern. The Reaper then says he had already figured she would make a move like that. Diablo is then surprised he didn't pierce her power system, but Eve reveals she expected him not to know. She then reveals herself as what would be called an amnesiac raid boss, something not even her master could imagine would obey a human. Eve then declares that he doesn't know her and claims to be the final trump card for her master and his little sister. Faced with this revelation, Diablo retreats under the pressure of the android's continuous attack. With that, she yells that he's too slow and activates the forced overload of her combat unit. A massive pillar of energy hits him head-on, raising a large smoke screen. After the attack, Eve falls to the ground, deactivated, causing Suma to desperately scream her name. The artisan then calls her a reckless idiot and runs toward her. With a furious glare, Suma turns toward the enemy amidst the dust. However, Diablo reappears unharmed, holding the transformation dagger. Faced with her resistance, Diablo laments being pushed this far, concluding there's no other way. He then states that he seems to have no other choice, and stabs his own neck with the dagger. With the blow, a pillar of blue energy erupts from his body, engulfing him completely. The energy then transforms him, causing claws, wings, and a tail to sprout from his body. Now in his new form, he remarks that he finally understands what it feels like to be in a monster's body. Suma then taunts him, saying he's become a true Diablo, and that it suits him better than the title of Reaper. With horns and glowing eyes, Diablo's new form is fully revealed. Suma then recalls that every monster case in the game, like Shika becoming a fairy and Hayato a birdman, was unique. However, the craftsman admits he's never seen a transformation quite like this one. He then realizes this creature isn't any monster he's ever heard of. In the sky, Diablo hovers on his new wings, showing off his newfound power. He then calls out to Hayato, ordering him to use his Call of the Beast skill at once. The predator obeys and activates the beast summoning skill. A horde of beasts with glowing eyes then appears on the battlefield, surrounding the area. Diablo watches the scene with a confident, dark smile. In an unexpected move, he unleashes a shower of energy projectiles on the creatures he just summoned. The beasts are pierced and destroyed by their own master's merciless attack. After the slaughter, the beasts' bodies merge into a mass of purple and blue energy. Suma watches as the energy writhes and merges on the ground before him. Before him, a gigantic, multi-eyed creature emerges from the fusion as Diablo hovers in the sky. Without giving him a second to think, the massive creature lunges at him. Suma dodges the attack while activating his creation cube. He then summons the Staff of the Ice Wall to defend himself. Using the staff, he raises a massive ice barrier between himself and the creature. The monster's advance is momentarily stopped by the impact with the ice wall. He then creates the Willow Edge and declares that anything that gets through his defense will be met with area attacks. With the new weapon, he unleashes multiple attacks that pierce the barrier and strike the monster. He then declares they must keep moving to wear down the enemy, because stopping means death. Suddenly, Suma stops and looks up, sensing a new threat gathering. Above them, Diablo conjures a gigantic purple magic circle in the sky. From his high position, Diablo then invokes his ultimate technique, Eclipse Judgment. To defend himself, Suma raises his staff and summons an ice wall at maximum power. Even with his defense up, he looks up with an expression of despair. A pillar of dark energy descends from the magic circle and strikes the barrier. The ice wall shatters on impact, sending Suma flying. On the ground, Shika watches from beside Eve's deactivated body. With tears in her eyes, little Shika begs Eve to wake up. She then realizes that at this rate, her brother Soma will be defeated. Inside Eve, a central circuit begins to pulse with energy. Shika's image begins to glitch. For an instant, her appearance changes to that of a human girl with black hair. The glitching continues, momentarily revealing another person's face. As Shika's voice calls to her, Eve's energy core shines brightly. Shika declares that faltering at a moment like this is unacceptable. Seeing Eve stir, Shika asks if she can move now, and explains the situation. With Shika in her hand, Eve addresses her as "my lady," leaving Shika confused. Surprised, Shika asks if Eve's memories have finally returned. The android's system then reports that memory restoration has begun, but it's encountering multiple errors and warnings. The system then initiates a forced merger of backups and a rebuild of the weapon system, ignoring the 70% risk of self-destruction. The unit's highest priority directive is then revealed by the system. Meanwhile, the giant monster created by Diablo waits on the battlefield. Down on the ground, Suma struggles to get up after the last attack's impact. With that, Diablo's hand transforms into a long, sharp claw. The villain then rushes towards Suma at high speed for the final blow. At the last second, Eve appears in her new gear and strikes Diablo, sending him flying and killing his creation. Seeing her new weapon, Suma concludes that her memories have really returned. Eve explains she isn't sure if her memories are back, as unknown scenes are flooding her circuits. She then corrects herself, stating her highest priority is the young lady, but she hesitates for a moment. Upon seeing this, Diablo recognizes the weapon as the divine iron sword Tobelcane and identifies her as Grand Guignol Eve. The villain then admits he didn't recognize her because of the maid uniform and finds it fantastic that this is happening in the labyrinth. Even with her jumbled memories, Eve declares her duty is unchanged and she will protect that person, even if it costs her her own body. In response, Diablo says he wouldn't recommend that, as her unit was built only for physical destruction. He then points out that while it's an overwhelming weapon, the divine sword doesn't nullify magic, making it incomplete. Suma then touches the blade of Eve's sword with his hand. He says they can worry about memories later, and that if the surprise attack wasn't enough, they have to defeat him now. The android then declares they'll be fine as she feels the power flowing from him. With a wink, Suma simply asks her to trust him. Eve then smiles and confirms she's ready for battle. Diablo watches them with a look of contempt and prepares his next spell. Then, a massive dark energy attack is conjured in the air. The spell charges forward like a drill, tearing up the ground in its path. The dark energy attack moves forward, but meets unexpected resistance when it hits the sword. Eve's blade then begins to cut through the magic with a combined blue and yellow energy. In a single motion, the android charges forward and cuts clean through the spell with her weapon. Surprised, Diablo yells that it's impossible for his magic to have been split in two. Eve stands firm, her sword glowing brightly after the successful strike. The blade then continues on its path, slicing through the giant magic circle in the sky. With one final move, Eve defeats Diablo. Fallen on the ground, Diablo admits with a laugh that he lost the battle. In the background, Hayato wonders how the magic was cut off and concludes it could only be the work of creation. Eve then explains that to nullify the dark magic, she used light attribute materials on her weapon. Defeated, Diablo admits the enchantment's principle is rudimentary, but the power used was abnormal. Right after, Suma notices his enemy's body is starting to disappear. Diablo then clarifies that since he's a monster now, it's natural for his body to disappear upon death. Before he completely fades away, Suma approaches and grabs him by the collar. Furious, he demands to know where the dagger came from and how to reverse the transformation, asking if he was the one who turned Sheikah into a monster. Diablo just stares at him, his gaze fixed and expressionless. He then claims not to remember doing that to Sheikah and says the dagger came from a thorn he found in the lower levels. He adds that he doesn't know any way to reverse the process and never imagined the Philosopher's Stone could be the cure. Suma then asks if he's trying to say he isn't the main cause of the problem. As his body fades away, Diablo says believing him or not is his decision, but to remember one thing. With his last words, he warns him that the labyrinth is overflowing with unknown things and then disappears, leaving his items behind. A system notification then announces that Eve's specialized unit, the Divine Iron Sword Tubal-Cain, has been unlocked. A status panel displays the financial results, revealing that 49 million G are still needed to reach the final goal. Back on the surface, Suma reports the incidents to Altair, but admits he doubts Diablo's testimony. Despite his doubts, he knows his goal remains the same, as a crowd shouts that they're buying the burning blood of the infernal dragon and the crystal coral. In the middle of the auction, Suma presents the crystal coral for 10 million and the burning blood of the infernal dragon for 40 million, making everyone wonder how rich he is. With this purchase, he finally gathers 2 of the 3 materials needed for the Philosopher's Stone. The last and most expensive remaining item is the Elixir of Mercurius, which costs 50 million G in the surface area. As he thinks they're already past the halfway point, Ban calls out to him from the crowd. The barbarian then approaches and says he has something to discuss with him regarding that matter. Outside the shop, a person says goodbye to Eve and asks her to let them know if she has any problems. Inside the establishment, Sheikah asks if Eve is hurt, but the android replies that her self-repair function is normal. Sheikah then asks if she wants to eat something, but when Eve asks for an energy bottle, Sheikah interrupts her. Eve just watches her in silence, waiting for the next question. With a smile, Sheikah apologizes for the sudden interruption. At that moment, a glitch in the android's memory displays an image of Sheikah next to another girl. As she drinks, Eve states that her personality parameters haven't changed, but that memory fragment is different. Eve then concludes the fragment is likely an experience of hers from before her memory was damaged. Fortunately, she realizes that for now, the effect is just a slight confusion. Because of this, she worries that if the situation worsens, there's no guarantee she'll remain herself. So Sheikah insists that she stay quiet and rest, as the most crucial moment for healing is now. After apologizing, Eve asks if the little sister also takes care of the master that way. The unexpected question leaves Shika completely surprised. Shika then explains that Suma rarely gets sick and that he's actually the one who takes care of her, making Eve foresee a long conversation. At that moment, Suma opens the door announcing they're back, which startles Shika. While Eve comments on the rare guest, Ban hands over the information-gathering report the master requested. The barbarian then says he needs to eat something first, since he hasn't eaten since entering the lower levels, and grabs the cockatrice meat. Next, he shows the submaterial power herb to go with the meat. With that, Suma uses his creation cube and announces that the grilled cockatrice is ready. A perfectly grilled cockatrice thigh is served on a plate. Surprised, Eve asks if he can create food with his abilities, and he confirms he can, prompting her to ask Shika about her master's cooking. Shika joyfully replies that he has made cakes for her birthday before, making Eve once again foresee a long story. As he eats, Ban says it's time to get to the main topic. With that, he announces he has a good report and a bad report, and asks which one they want to hear first, leading Suma to ask for the good one. The barbarian then reports that although they didn't defeat the ancient dragon, they managed to repel it and get a mountain of items. He then reveals that one of the participants wants to place a massive order that could be worth up to 10 million, which gets Shika excited. Ban swallows his food before continuing the story. The barbarian then explains that the client's longtime partner was killed by Diablo, and the order is a reward for the revenge. Shika and Eve listen attentively to Ban's explanation. Suma's gaze remains serious and focused as he hears the news. With that, he says he's glad to know it was worth fighting without running away. The bone ban was holding breaks from the force of his bite. Next, he announces that now comes the bad report everyone was waiting for. With that, the barbarian reveals that someone else has turned into a monster, and it happened after Suma returned to the surface. Upon hearing the news, Suma concludes that Diablo's testimony was true. He then understands that the owner of the thorn that became the material for the dagger is the one who turned Shika into a fairy and continues to spread the damage. Suma asks if he has any idea who it could be, but Ban replies that he didn't see or hear anything, and his analysis skill yielded no results. Next to the corrupted gem, Ban concludes that if even he doesn't know its origin, then no one in the labyrinth will. At this, the barbarian despairs and yells that it's checkmate, but Suma scolds him for giving up so quickly. Eve then comments that they really have no clues, as even the gem's name is corrupted. Upon touching Diablo's dagger, a blue energy is emitted from the object. This triggers a vision of an army of dragons and demons before a dark castle. The vision then focuses on a dragon charging towards her, causing her to step back in fear. Suddenly, Eve falls unconscious and is caught by Suma. Worried, Shika shouts the android's name and asks if she's okay. At this, Eve gets up and says she now knows the name she was looking for. She then reveals that the Demon King Oz is most likely the name of the problem's main cause. With a confused expression, Violet asks what a Demon Lord is. The cleric then says she's never heard of it, and Eve adds that Suma didn't know the term either. Shika then wonders if the suspect who turned her into a monster is a mysterious creature that not even Suma knows about. As Eve offers some sweets, Violet takes the chance to ask the other maid, Clara, if she knows anything. The maid named Clara promptly replies that she doesn't, as that name isn't registered in her memory either. With that, Eve concludes that, as expected, Clara is a standard automaton and doesn't have that specific memory. Eve then reveals to Violet that she's keeping the other half of the club, but the cleric replies she wouldn't be able to recognize it anyway. Next, Shika laments that since they got no results, her only option is to search the labyrinth for the same presence as the jewel. Suddenly, the two look at Shika in surprise as she approaches the orb Eve is holding. Violet asks if this presence is just magical power, but Eve denies it, leaving Shika incredulous at their doubt. Shika explains that the dagger, the jewel, and Diablo all emitted a distinct presence, which is why she assumed the Demon Lord would do the same. She then hypothesizes that her sister and the Demon Lord Os are causing a resonance through their abilities. With a sparkle in her eyes, Shika realizes this means she might be able to find the Demon Lord and be useful to Suma. Not quite understanding, Violet says she's happy for her, and then asks where Suma is right now. The answer is that he went to the lower levels on the committee's recommendation, which surprises Violet about his schedule. On the way to their destination, one of the committee's knights decides to reconfirm the details of the request with Suma. He then explains that the mission is to interrogate a victim of a transformation phenomenon, a target known as Georg the Dragoon. The knight reveals that Georg has been refusing to speak with the committee and suggests that Suma, being another victim, might be able to persuade him. Without warning, Suma interrupts him and grabs his arm, telling him to stop immediately. Just ahead, a large explosion occurs, forcing everyone to stop and watch. From the top of a cliff, a desperate voice shouts for them not to come any closer and to stay away. The figure reveals himself to be Georg, who, in his monster form, pleads for them to leave while he can still maintain his sanity. From this, Suma understands that Georg fears his mind will also turn into a monster along with his body. He then begins a creation using a scythe, a key, and a piece of cloth as materials. Upon activating the triple creation skill, a prism-shaped item materializes in his hand. In an act of desperation, Georg fires an energy blast while yelling for them not to get close. With a simple gesture, Suma projects a small, dark sphere that completely absorbs the attack. Surprised, the monster man can only let out a gasp at what he just saw. The sphere then explodes in a small, controlled detonation right in front of the group. After the dust settles, Georg stares at the item Suma is now holding and calls it Falx Noctis. The scythe's blade cuts through the air, creating a momentary dark rift in the sky. As soon as he landed on Georg's head, Suma scolded him for not listening to his warning. With a shout, the monster man falls backward as the young adventurer lands nimbly on the ground. Suma then hits him with the weapon's handle, telling him to calm down, but Georg cries out in pain. While assuring him that his heart won't become a monster, Suma explains that his sister was also transformed, but remained the same. Impressed, one of the knights praises the artisan's splendid work, saying how reassuring it is to have him around. Unexpectedly, Altair appears and invites Suma to join the committee so they can shine together in the fight against the transformations. With a direct refusal, Suma states he doesn't have time for volunteer work when he needs to gather 50 million as quickly as possible. The committee knight is left speechless by the young man's pragmatic response. Suddenly, a female voice suggests that the help could come in the form of a creation request. Suma immediately recognizes the voice and turns in surprise, identifying the collector, Ishtar. He then questions what she would be doing in the lower levels of the labyrinth. Ishtar reveals she was following him via a hologram projected by Gilbert and asks if she managed to surprise him. She then details the request for the creation of an item to help defeat the demon lord Os. As a reward for the mission's success, Ishtar offers Suma the sum of 30 million in gold. Suma comments to Gilbert that Ishtar, as always, leaves no room for carelessness, having already investigated his presence on the lower levels and the demon lord. Through the hologram, Ishtar explains that if the number of people in the labyrinth decreases, the discovery of precious items will be delayed, which is why she wants him to end the chaos. The image reveals that the item he needs to buy, the elixir of Mercurius, costs 50 million gold. With a smile, Ishtar states that with his shop thriving, he'll easily get the remaining 20 million, and Suma admits she really did her research. One of the committee knights adds that they desire the stability of the surface world. Next, Ishtar states that her own desire is the stability of the supply network. Hearing both sides, Suma simply declares that he desires sufficient compensation. Looking directly at the hologram, the young adventurer concludes that this is just business. With a confident smile, he finally agrees to take the job, but demands that the 30 million success fee be paid in full. Ishtar returns a small smile, accepting the terms of the deal established between them. Soon after, Suma turns to the monster man, confirms his name is Georg, and asks him to guide them. The young man then requests that Georg take them to the location of his last memory, and he reveals it to be a floating island called Rin Island. Arriving at the island by boat, Suma immediately notices a structure that looks like a teleportation gate. Georg explains that his group discovered it, which is why Suma probably wouldn't know the place. Finally, he reveals his last memory was trying to cross that gate with his group, thinking they could go somewhere even deeper. Suma concludes that finding Os's body will be a problem, but is interrupted by Georg, who warns him not to get any closer. The warning comes true instantly, as Georg shouts about the monsters from the other side, just as a tentacled creature emerges from the portal. In a swift move, Suma attacks one of the creature's enormous tentacles with his scythe. The otherworldly creature then reveals itself fully, and the young adventurer prepares for the confrontation. Right after, Suma scolds him for not warning them sooner, but Georg apologizes, saying he only just remembered. After the brief confrontation, the creature's remains are quickly sucked back into the portal. Observing the now calm portal, Suma comments that it was a sick joke, and that he would never bring Sheikah to a place like this. Shocked, Shika asks why she can't go on the expedition. In a flashback, the fairy questions why she's the only one staying behind, insisting she can sense the demon lord's presence, but Suma apologizes, saying he can't take her. Without giving many details, he simply replies that there are several reasons for his decision. Secretly, Suma thinks that the dangers in the deepest part of the labyrinth are unknown, and there's no way he can take Shika to a place like that. He also concludes that if he explained the reason, she would probably oppose the exploration itself. Eve just silently observes the interaction between the two. Back in the present, the floating island with the portal is shown in its entirety. A large crowd of adventurers gathers in front of the portal where Suma awaits them. In hiding, Eve admits that despite what she said, she's still worried about him. Soon, the automaton warns Shika, who is on her shoulder, that she'll be discovered if she keeps showing herself. Nearby, Ban comments to a friend on how huge the crowd is. Oliver then explains that as soon as the committee asked for cooperation, volunteers showed up in droves. Among the crowd, Georg and other high-level adventurers await the start of the exploration. Seeing so many experienced warriors, Eve thinks that maybe there was no reason to worry, as Shika shrinks on her shoulder. Next, the loud sound of a megaphone echoes through the area, signaling that an announcement is about to be made. Using a megaphone, Suma announces the exploration's goal is to find the cause of the transformation, and that the items he prepared must be used against the root cause. Eve then presents several items that resist abnormalities, which should be used as a minimum safeguard against the transformation. Suma then asks them to use the marking spheres if possible, as tracking the root cause's location would be a major breakthrough. Hidden, Eve and Shika watch intently as the young adventurer continues to give instructions. With the megaphone in hand, he prepares to give the final command to start the operation. Even from a distance, Shika watches everything with an attentive gaze and a slight smile. Suddenly, a gigantic tentacled creature emerges from the portal, surprising everyone. Without hesitation, Suma orders the operation to begin, instructing the suppression team to distract the monster so the investigation team can advance. Quickly, the adventurers fly towards the monster, starting a large-scale battle. Taking advantage of the distraction, a hand reaches toward the brightly glowing portal. With a decisive step, Eve moves forward and prepares to cross through the mysterious portal. Shika, who is close by her side, watches the scene with an expression of pure apprehension. Upon arriving on the other side, Suma comments that the place looks like an alternate dimension full of errors, like a buggy game. Eve despairs when she notices they're alone, but Suma reassures her, explaining that everyone was just sent to different locations. He then reveals that the portal's nature had already been determined, and that everyone entered knowing this could happen. While staying alert, Shika admits she didn't know Suma was making so many preparations behind the scenes. With that, she feels inspired by Suma's capability and decides she also needs to try her best. Next, the group advances through an unstable landscape full of glitches and crystalline structures. Soon, two creatures appear, and Suma realizes they might be similar to the chimera they faced before. Shika then wonders if this is the work of Diablo or the Demon Lord. With a glow in her eyes, Shika focuses her attention to sense the presence around them. As soon as she detects something, she tells Eve she sensed a presence coming from a nearby church. Promptly, the automaton turns to Suma and reports that a suspicious structure has been discovered, proposing they investigate it. The church's interior is revealed to be an abandoned place, with broken pews and a dusty altar. As soon as they enter, Suma asks Eve if she can use her specialized weapon, and the automaton confirms that its functions have been restored. Hidden on her shoulder, Shika recognizes the same presence as Diablo's, and believes there might be a clue there. With her great sword in hand, Eve orders whoever is hiding to show themselves. Suma then reinforces the warning, stating he knows there's someone behind one of the pillars. A silhouette moves slowly from behind the structure, revealing they were not alone. Seeing who it is, Suma reacts with surprise and questions their presence there. The silhouettes are revealed to be the mage Ignis and the predator Hayato, now in their monstrous forms. Immediately, Suma readies his creation cube for battle. Quickly, the two surrender and try to explain that they were forced to become monsters because of a dagger. Suma then questions them for playing the victim, even after they attacked him so enthusiastically. Afraid, they beg, saying they don't want to be annihilated like Diablo and that they're already at their limit from being pursued. At that moment, the space around them begins to crack, catching Suma's attention. Right after, Shika screams a desperate warning for Suma to look up. A massive energy attack descends from the heavens, striking the ground with violent force. Surprised, Suma notices Shika's presence and immediately accuses Eve of being an accomplice for bringing her along without permission. While Eve tries to justify herself, saying she had no choice, Shika interrupts to warn them about something more important. Shika then warns that she's sensing a malevolent presence, the same one from Ishtar's dagger and the jewel. With wide eyes, she states she is certain certain there's no mistake in her perception. Eve also stares at the rift in space, about to identify the source of that presence. Suma raises his head and prepares for whatever is about to emerge from it. Finally, the creature reveals itself completely and is identified as the fearsome demon lord Oz. Floating amidst an aura of energy, the demon lord stares down at Suma. The young adventurer confirms that, from its presence and appearance, it is undoubtedly the demon lord Ose. Hayato then recognizes it, panicking as he claims that's the monster that was chasing them. Even while wondering if they should run, Suma decides this is a good opportunity to gather information. In a quick flashback, he remembers coming up with a strategy for a situation just like this. With that, Suma raises a sword and announces he's calling for reinforcements. The tip of the blade strikes the ground, creating an impact point. Then, a pillar of red light shoots up toward the sky. The beam of light pierces the church ceiling and projects high into the air. From a distance, Oliver recognizes the light as an emergency signal and wonders if it came from Suma. Ban also sees the signal and is surprised by the energy's color. Elsewhere, Georg panics, realizing the signal means they've found the demon lord. Back at the church, a shadowy claw begins to emerge from the ground. Surrounded by tentacles sprouting from the ground, Suma realizes he needs to place the mark while he still can. Before he could react, Suma is completely engulfed by the creature's appendages. The tentacles shatter the ground around him, but the young adventurer narrowly escapes the surprise attack. From the impact, the sword he used for the signal shatters into pieces on the ground. Outside, the beam of light rising to the sky finally fades out. The demon lord's hand comes down in a swift, direct attack on the group. On the ground, Suma can only watch the blow coming toward him, unable to react in time. At the last second, Eve leaps in front of him and uses her sword to block the massive attack. Standing in front of Suma and Shika, the automaton tells him to leave this to her. She then reveals that even though she doesn't remember their past relationship, something happens. Eve continues, explaining that whenever she looks at that monstrous figure, a feeling emerges. With her eyes glowing intensely, she states that an uncontrollable rage is welling up from deep within her heart. The automaton then activates her battle mode, summoning her armor and a weapon for the fight. With a single strike, Eve charges forward and attacks the demon lord, who defends itself with a magic circle. The clash of powers creates an explosion of energy, and Hayato recognizes the automaton as the raid boss, Grand Guignol. The flash from the battle lights up the sky and causes a shockwave that damages the church tower. Demon Lord Oz manages to block the powerful attack with an energy shield. The demon lord stares intently at Eve, holding its position in the air. With great effort, the automaton keeps pushing her weapon against the enemy's energy shield. Then, the creature aims its hand at Ignis and Hayato, preparing a counterattack. Unexpectedly, Ose fires a purple energy beam that hits the two monsters. Hit head-on, the two scream in pain as they are completely engulfed by the energy. Ignis then realizes he is no longer himself and begs for the mind control to stop. Completely transformed into feral creatures, the two charge forward and attack Eve by surprise. Startled, Suma wonders if they are being manipulated by Ose. With a furious cry, Eve turns to the two monsters and tells them they're in her way. The automaton then spins around and strikes the creatures to get them away from her master. Suddenly, Ose strikes them with its wing, sending them both flying with a single blow. Suma watches in shock as the demon lord floats in the air, completely ignoring Eve. Before he could understand, the young man realizes the monster is ignoring her on purpose to attack him with its tentacles. In a swift move, Suma summons an energy shield to protect himself from the imminent attack. With determination, he manages to block the tentacles and prepares for the next phase of the fight. From the impact of the explosion, Suma is thrown backward, and Shika screams his name in despair. Though injured, he assures her he's fine and tells little Shika to go hide somewhere safe. In a flashback, Shika recalls that although hit points absorb damage, status effects are an exception. She continues, explaining that regardless of HP, a failed resistance check allows the attack to bypass any defense. With this, Shika concludes that if the monster transformation is a status effect, Ose's attack could be fatal. Thus, she understands that the demon lord's thorn is basically an instant death weapon. Suma wonders if Ose is ignoring Eve to eliminate the weaker ones first, and quickly activates his reverse creation skill. The skill then deconstructs an item, turning it into its basic crafting materials. With two shields in hand, the young man wonders if the demon lord's real goal is to obtain kin. He then deduces that Ose targeted those who transformed and ignored Eve because she is immune to the transformation. Suma realizes the enemy is holding back. As if it wanted to kill him, it could have summoned more monsters. With his new shields, He concludes that he's being hunted for being the only human and that Os is waiting for a chance to use the thorn. The demon lord charges forward again, striking Suma directly with its tentacles. Worried, the young man realizes he won't have time to switch his strategy to a counterattack. Seeing the attack approach, he fears that at this rate, he will be completely overwhelmed by the enemy's strength. Straining, Suma uses his shields to block the direct attack from Os's thorn. Suddenly, a red object hits the demon lord's side in a small explosion. Surprised, the young adventurer turns and recognizes it as one of the marking spheres. In a desperate act, Shika, who threw the item, yells for Suma to run. Immediately, a targeting mark appears over Ose, confirming the item worked. The demon lord then turns its attention to Shika and attacks her with a beam of energy, causing Suma to cry out. Engulfed by the energy, Shika screams in pain as her form begins to falter. Amidst her despair, little Shika feels her body transforming and begs for help. With a determined look, Eve prepares to intervene. The automaton then rushes at high speed toward the danger, shouting for her little sister. Paralyzed, Suma reaches out his hand and screams Shika's name in utter desperation. His eyes widen in pure terror at the scene unfolding before him. Sweat trickles down his face as he watches on, powerless, completely devastated. Suma realizes he has been pierced by Os's thorn. Before Suma could react, Os's tail strikes him from behind with a swift, precise blow. With a cry of pain, the young artisan feels the attack's effect surge through his entire body. The demon lord then floats in the center of the church, watching his victim fallen on the floor. Filled with fury, Eve turns to the creature and curses it for attacking her master. In response, Os just slowly turns its face toward her, showing no reaction. Propelled by her armor, the automaton charges forward and lands a powerful punch, hitting the demon lord squarely. The blow's impact is so strong it hurls Os out of the church, sending him crashing into a cliff. Giving the enemy no time to recover, Eve continues her assault with a rapid series of strikes. With a determined look on her face, she keeps the pressure on the demon lord in midair. The force of her attacks pushes Os further and further back. As the battle rages on, Suma realizes he's been hit by the monster transformation thorn. Keeping his cool, he decides to analyze the situation and takes out an item he prepared for this exact moment. Upon using the item, he discovers the success rate for resisting the transformation is only 38%. In desperation, Suma laments that all the countermeasures he prepared resulted in such a low chance. With no time to lose, he decides to use a maximum resistance enhancement agent, ignoring the possible side effects. With the success chance rising to 50%, Suma feels the transformation energy course through his body. Shortly after, a system notification confirms the resistance check was successful. Exhausted, Suma gasps for air as the thorn in his chest slowly begins to dissipate. This confirms his suspicion that he can resist the effect using his disease resistance as long as he doesn't fully transform. Suddenly, the transformation energy hits him again, making him cry out in pain from the surprise. Suma then realizes the thorn will repeat the status check indefinitely until he finally turns into a monster. Remembering Shika, he refuses to give up and strengthens his resolve to resist. Amid the pain, the small Shika appears before him, calling his name in a gentle voice. With her name on his lips, Suma focuses all his willpower to fight the curse. A sphere of shimmering fairy dust then forms around him, protecting him from the dark energy. Shika then explains that when it comes to countermeasures for diseases, this is the best option. Calling out to him once more, Shika looks at him with a meaningful gaze. With a serene smile, she says goodbye and confesses that she truly loved him. Then, Shika closes her eyes and her body begins to fall slowly. Suma finds himself holding what's left of Shika in his hand. With a furious gaze, Suma faces the situation in complete silence. With clenched teeth, his expression fills with a new and dangerous resolve. Next, he pulls out the piece of the thorn still embedded in his chest. With a shout, Suma uses the thorn to create something. As his hand begins to transform, a notification confirms the disease check has been completely neutralized. Immediately, Suma begins a detailed analysis of Shika's remains to understand what happened. Focused on finding something, he searches for any clue in the fragment's data. Soon, the monsters Ignis and Hayato land in front of him, interrupting his analysis. Observing them, Suma realizes they were merely being manipulated by Os's magical waves. With the thorn in hand, he concludes that if he can nullify the magic's effect, he can reverse the situation. Seeing it's now or never, Suma decides to fuse the thorn with his creation cube without hesitation. As the two monsters advance to attack, the artisan prepares to use his new item. A flash of energy erupts from the ground, hitting everyone in the area in an instant. In an agile move, Suma dodges the two creatures' attack, slipping between them. With the new weapon in hand, the young artisan prepares to test his newly formed theory. He then strikes the two monsters with the energy blade, which covers them in a dark aura. Amidst the smoke, Ignis and Hayato start to cough, wondering what's happening to their bodies. Suma then theorizes that, just like Diablo, Osei was also just manipulating his monsters. From this, he deduces he can overwrite the control command with an item of the same magical power. The young man then concentrates Sheikah's energy in the palm of his hand, ready to unleash its power. A large sphere of energy expands from him, enveloping the entire church in a blue light. As the energy dissipates, Sheikah's power flows along the ground and returns to Suma's hand. Kneeling, the young man looks up with an exhausted yet hopeful expression. With a tear running down his cheek, he remembers the little Sheikah who protected him. A vision of Sheikah sleeping peacefully in the palm of a hand flashes through his mind for a moment. Back in the present, Suma clasps his hands and gives thanks that everything worked out in the end. In the distance, a trail of smoke rises from the forest, marking the spot where the battle continues. Amidst the destruction, Eve and the demon lord Oz face off, ready for the next clash. As the thorn regenerates in Oz's chest, Eve realizes its strength and regeneration speed are superior to Diablo's. The demon lord's eye glows with a menacing intensity, hinting at its next move. This makes Eve wonder who will give out first, the enemy's regeneration or her own ability to maintain this form. Oz stares at the automaton in silence, preparing for the battle's climax. Suddenly, a massive magic circle appears on the ground, trapping both opponents inside. Eve notices the shift in the demon lord's presence and concludes it's going all out, deciding to stop it even if it costs her life. Before she could act, a powerful energy attack from outside strikes the magic circle with full force. Surprised by the intervention, the automaton turns to see who has arrived. On a nearby cliff, the reinforcements celebrate the hit and rush to join the battle, seeing that both are still alive. Taking advantage of the distraction, Os uses the magic circle to begin a swift retreat from the battlefield. The demon lord casts one last look back as it escapes through the forest. It then dives into an energy portal that opens on the ground. The creature disappears completely, sinking into the pool of energy. Realizing it's retreating, Eve tries to stop it from escaping, but it's already too late. Back in her original form, Eve concludes that Os fled as soon as the situation turned unfavorable, proving to be a monster on a different level. Immediately after, a powerful energy overload hits her, making her scream in pain on the ground. With the pain, a new fragment of her broken memory reveals that she had fought Os in the past. The memory ends with the shocking revelation that in that confrontation she was completely defeated. Back in his room, Suma approaches the bookshelf while watching the small Sheikah. On a cushion, Sheikah begins to mumble as she slowly awakens from her sleep. With a small movement, she opens her eyes and looks to the side. Suddenly, Sheikah sits up, startled, and shouts Suma's name. With a gentle smile, Suma holds her and says she's finally awake. Right after, Eve reassures her, explaining that not even a day has passed since the incident. Relieved, Sheikah sits on the cushion and expresses her joy that everything is okay. Suma asks how she is, but Sheikah replies that's her line and she doesn't remember anything that happened. Just then, a voice comes from a communication screen, announcing that he's also awake. General Commander Altair then reports that, to everyone's relief, neither he nor Suma have any after effects. With that, he decides to briefly review the current situation, highlighting 3 important points for everyone. The first point is that the labyrinth investigation has continued, but the key figure, Osei, remains missing. Second, Altair reveals that the monster duo was taken into custody after they begged for protection. For the third and final point, the commander decides it would be best if Suma himself explained it. With a sigh, Suma admits he had a suspicion the moment he heard the name Osei, and seeing his face just confirmed everything. With conviction, Suma reveals he has discovered Os's true identity, leaving Sheikah completely shocked. He then begins to explain that years before the labyrinth appeared, there was an internal data leak from a game. Amidst this data was a hidden story revealing that the Grand Guignol series were mechanical life forms from an ancient civilization. Within this information, he found an implementation proposal for a character named Osei, after one of the 72 demons of Solomon. Suma clarifies that these demons are from old occult books, and Sheikah recognizes them as a common element in anime and games. He then confirms that, among the 72 demons, there is one called Osei. Legend says that when summoned, the demon god Os appears as a leopard and can transform humans into any form. With a smile, Suma asks if the leopard head and the forced transformation ability seem like a mere coincidence. He then states that the similarities, combined with Eve's testimony, naturally reveal the answer. An image shows Os in his full form, leading other monstrous creatures. Finally, Suma declares that Os's true identity is that of an unimplemented boss, the Lord of Monsters, who destroyed the ancient civilization. Shocked, Sheikah realizes that's why the transformation data was full of noise. It was an unimplemented boss. She then concludes that, since he's from the ancient civilization, not even Eve at her peak could defeat him. Hearing the revelation, Eve remains silent, processing the newly discovered information. Through the screen, Altair asks if knowing his identity has any meaning, and Sheikah agrees it doesn't help locate or defeat him. With a confident smile, Suma states that their conclusion isn't entirely correct. The sudden statement leaves both Altair and Sheikah completely surprised by what they heard. Meanwhile, Eve just watches the conversation with a neutral and attentive expression. Suma then explains that the direct confrontation made it clear that Os operates within the labyrinth's rules, which makes sense for an unimplemented monster. He continues, revealing that while there's no specific healing item, general countermeasures against status abnormalities were effective. Furthermore, he recalls that, like other monsters, Os couldn't ignore the basic rules of damage, which could be offset by HP. The decisive point, he says, was that Ose fled the moment reinforcements arrived, something an invincible entity wouldn't do. With that, the young man concludes that if the creature is bound by the labyrinth's rules, there are many ways to fight it. With a confident smile, he claims that with his crafting skills, he'll be able to defeat the Demon Lord for sure. Altair asks if that's really possible, and Suma begins to explain the details of his plan. After hearing the explanation, the commander simply says he understands the proposed strategy. He then confirms the method is suitable for subjugating a Demon Lord, and decides to send teams to find Os as soon as possible. Unexpectedly, Suma interrupts him and asks him not to send the investigation teams just yet. He then reminds everyone that it was Ose who turned Sheikah into a fairy, and asks where they think she was attacked. Finally, the young man explains that since Sheikah has never been to the lower levels, she likely encountered Ose in an area shallower than the mid-levels. With an image of a dark fortress floating above the forest, Suma explains what this means. He then reveals that Ose can appear anywhere, and that the low number of victims was only due to his cautious personality. Shocked, Altair realizes the search area is the entire labyrinth, making it too vast to investigate. With a smile, Suma says he has already prepared a countermeasure for this, as he has a very capable little sister at home. Next, he explains that the marking sphere Sheikah threw can be used to track Os's reaction and narrow down his location. Looking at little Sheikah, the young man asks her to lend him her strength to track the enemy's presence. Promptly, Sheikah agrees to help with an expression full of enthusiasm and determination. Suma then turns to Altair and asks for a favor, which the commander accepts without even hesitating. The request is for him to call back the explorers and form the strongest possible subjugation squad. Worried, Altair questions him about the risk of a mass attack tactic increasing transformations, but Suma reassures him. He then clarifies that the squad doesn't need to fight Os, but rather secure a safe path for him. Suma deduces that Os must have already realized he's facing humans capable of killing him. With this, he believes the Demon Lord will first increase his military strength, turning the confrontation into a battle of numbers. Finally, the young craftsman stares at Os's image and declares that, in other words, this has become a war. Shortly after, the narrator explains they set out in search of Os's hideout. With Sheikah on his shoulder, Suma clarifies that the search is just a matter of walking through each area of the labyrinth in order. Looking at the map, little Sheikah points out that the marking sphere will react once they enter the right area. Soon, the narrator reveals that by relying on this and Sheikah's senses, they finally found a suspicious cave. The next step was to join the subjugation squad for final preparations at the team's base. However, what was supposed to be a strategy meeting begins with Ban proposing a toast to celebrate the squad's formation. With his mug raised, the barbarian leads all the adventurers in a lively toast. Seeing Ban drinking wildly, Suma comments that he figured this would happen. Eve mentions she heard it was a pre-operation meeting, but Suma replies that for them, it's just an excuse for a feast. A hand rests on the chair next to Suma, catching his attention. Altair then asks him to let it slide, explaining that since explorers risk their lives, this might be their last chance to have fun. While pouring a drink, he adds that the operation is particularly dangerous, and Suma agrees that he knows. Suma then reassures him, saying the preparations are done and that it's fine, as long as they don't get hangovers. Suddenly, one of the adventurers gets excited seeing that they brought some Aurora wine, and Suma is left speechless. Angrily, Suma realizes that Altair, the commander, actually intends to drink until he passes out. While Suma and Ban were messing around in the background, Altair approaches Eve and asks for a word with her. The commander then reveals he was surprised by what Suma told him and asks if he can really trust her. The automaton just watches him in silence for a moment, showing no reaction. With a steady gaze, Eve begins to explain her true nature. Soon, she reveals herself as a survivor of the ancient machine civilization and an entity that once opposed them. The automaton then confesses that her memories have been returning and that her hatred for Ose remains in her circuits. However, Eve assures him that her loyalty to her master and her little sister will never waver, even if she regains all her memories. Altair listens to her intently, processing the profound revelation. With a smile, the commander simply says that he understands the situation. Then, Altair states that as long as Suma trusts her, he will too. The narrator explains that the concept of day and night exists in some areas to simulate the ecology of nocturnal monsters. With nightfall, the darkness provides the perfect moment to launch a surprise attack. The demon lord Ose, however, had already anticipated the humans' attack. The intelligent monster's choice was a signal of light that pierced the night's darkness. Unexpectedly, a preemptive strike is launched from above by an army of shadow creatures. The monster's surprise attack collides with an energy barrier, causing a massive explosion. Suma comments that it's better to be safe than sorry. Alongside his companions, he reveals Plan B: intercept their surprise attack and crush them. With a gesture, Suma signals to Georg and the others that the operation has begun. Next, two archers fire a volley of energy arrows toward the sky. Mages and other warriors join the assault, casting their own spells against the monsters. A series of explosions lights up the sky as the explorers' attacks land squarely on their enemies. Excited, Georg celebrates the successful ambush and shouts that they did it. Suddenly, a new threat emerges from the smoke, taking the adventurers by surprise. A gigantic stone dragon emerges from the trees, ready for combat. Without hesitation, Ban charges forward and strikes the dragon with a mighty blow from his hammer. The impact of the attack begins to crack the stone monster's head. With a war cry, Ban challenges anyone else who wants to be split in two to face him. As the battle unfolds, Ose watches his minions fall, concluding the surprise attack was a failure. Facing the situation, the Demon Lord decides there's no point in pressing the battle, and that he just needs to hide and rebuild his forces. However, the Demon Lord's plan to retreat was about to be thwarted. Unexpectedly, an assault team breaks stealth and appears from the sky to intercept him. Immediately, one of the members uses her witch ability to launch a cursed weapon. At the same time, the group's archer fires a perfect shot using his own skill. The attack, however, is deflected by Ose's armor, causing one of the warriors to groan in frustration. Even so, his companion celebrates, as the projectile still hit its mark. Immediately after, a mark of pink flames appears on the Demon Lord's shoulder. With that, an energy aura begins to completely envelop him, destabilizing his form. The energy then forces him to writhe as his appearance begins to glitch. The witch reveals the inflicted debuff was a teleport block, thanks to Suma's custom-made gauntlets. The spell, true to its name, has the effect of completely sealing spatial teleportation. Eve reflects that a countermeasure to teleportation was inevitable. Unable to escape, Ose turns and flies swiftly toward a new destination. Immediately, a tracker reports that the target is heading for the cave and that the plan is proceeding successfully. With that confirmation, Suma orders everyone to begin pursuit before the enemy can regroup. While being carried by Hayato, Suma orders him to speed up, but the Predator refuses to take orders from him. Oliver scolds them both, reminding them that you can never have enough firepower in a battle like this. Just ahead, the cave entrance comes into view, emanating a dark and menacing aura. Suddenly, a mass of tentacles erupts from the darkness, catching everyone off guard with a swift attack. Oliver quickly yells for Suma not to stop, as he and the others prepare to intercept the strike. Suma then hits the ground and runs for the cave entrance, slipping between the tentacles. Oliver and Altair slam into one of the appendages, clearing a path for the young man. Then, Oliver yells for Suma to leave this to them and keep going. Altair, however, says he'll catch up shortly, as he has something to settle. With a confident grin, the commander stands beside Oliver and says he'll join him as soon as he takes down the big guy.